we use the command that we call the pip. So what exactly is going on? What happened when we typed pip install? So when you say pip install, if you are connected to the internet, now for Python, there is a package manager, an installer that helps you installation of necessary libraries you need. Now this is called pip, and every single library that you're going to use in Python for building web applications, if you're building data science pipelines, if you're building machine learning applications, chances are you're going to be using open source libraries. How then do you find the necessary libraries that you need to build applications? The quickest way is to go to the Python package index, and let's take a look at exactly what we're talking about. The Python package index here, we're going to be talking about pypy.org, and for every single package that you're looking for, from artificial intelligence packages, AI, machine learning, web development, you're going to find everything here on pypy. Okay? So you can come here and you can just type even something as simple as JSON, and when you click enter, you see a couple of libraries with links and documentation, applications that are built by engineers like you and me and every other person that has something that they want people to work with. Now, as an engineer, I also have my applications that I built on pypy. I have a couple of libraries built on pypy. So for instance, there's a library called Amebo that is on pypy, and then there is a library called Heaven that is on pypy, and these applications are very quick, simple way for you to build distributed apps. So we're going to take a look at some of these apps in a bit. We're going to take a look at some of these libraries in a bit. So again, for you to install the necessary libraries, you need to have Python installed on your computer. And then if you want to install a package, you're going to say pip install, the name of the package, and it should give you it should pull down install. What pip actually does is pip goes to Python package index, okay, which is like an online database of all the applications that you need that exists for Python, and then it looks for the best match given the name that you specified, and there is a translation process that actually happens. So if you basically say pip install and then you say something like my package, it will also find my underscore package, okay? If you say pip install my dash package, it will also find my underscore package, just in case best match. So remember, Python snake case. So when you type any library that you want to install in snake case or kebab case, there's going to be a translation process, and then once that is translated, you should get the necessary package pulled down and you should be good to go. Okay, so to recap real quickly, before we went on a break, we talked about the packages. We talked about how for Python, if you want to create a package, you're going to create a folder, and in that folder, you're going to create a double underscore or a dunder file. It's a special file, particularly if it's a double underscore init.py file. It's special to Python. The minute Python enters into a directory and that file is present, that is the first place it's going to visit. So it is an initializer of sorts for that package. So Python goes in, and then you can put your code there, and you can import other things that you have created in other modules. To recap, when we take a look at the screen, what we have here, we have a pages.py, which is a Python module. Okay, we have main.py, which is a Python module. We're going to be taking a look at what it means to create a Python module. It's quite simple. In the beginning of the exercise, we talked about how, for Python and for all the files you have on your computer, how the extensions tell your operating system what exactly a file is. Now, in the case of Python, we have the .py extension. In the case of Java, we have the Java. In the case of JavaScript, we have .js. In the case of HTML, we have .htm or .html. So the different extensions that exist for the different file types that can be found on your system. Now, you don't necessarily have to name your Python module .py. You can actually just name your Python module .p, and in theory it should still work. But then, because of the convention where so many engineers across the world already named their applications and it ends in a .py or the .py x or .py whatever, you are going to miss out on the syntax highlighting that comes with using the .py extension automatically. So if we come here and we create a new file and we call this new file play.p, and then we opened this file, Command J, Command B to make this, and we say def name, you see that the syntax highlighting is not necessary. Like it doesn't, you have to go and specifically tell Visual Studio Code that this is a Python file by going here and changing it from plain text to something else. Okay, so just so we're clear, you can name it what you want, but then you're not going with convention and you're fighting or swimming across across the current. Okay, so you call it .py and you should be golden. So I want everyone to go ahead and create a Python module. Okay, you can call that Python module whatever you want. Okay, you can call it 1.py, 2.py, me.py, food.py, biryani.py, nigeria.py, africa.py. Go ahead and create a Python module. In that Python module, name it what you want. After you're done with the Python, creating the Python module, please, in the chat, just type done, 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 and then I'm going to go ahead and explain the magic behind what you've done and what you're actually doing. So let's go ahead, create a Python module. Remember to create a Python module, you can use a terminal, and in the terminal you can just say something. Not all at once. If you're done creating a Python module, just type done. If you're stumped on how to do it, remember you can just say touch in the terminal. We're going to give 1 more minute and then we're going to continue. Amanda, beautiful. Super excited to see you again, Amanda. Happy to see the progress you're making. Okay, so Amanda is done, no, Chizedek is done, and we're going to see if we have Christy is done. We're going to see if we have a couple more people that are done, and then we can continue. Jane, well done, Jane. Okay, so who else? Okay, so this is perhaps the simplest programming language that we're going to learn. So what we're going to do, the more Toye is done. Beautiful, 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 beautiful. Do we have more people, more participants? Let's keep the ball rolling. Okay, so if you have created a Python module, either in the terminal by saying touch the module.py, or you right-clicked and then you created your module, like play here. Now, what I want you to do in this module is we're going to go ahead and we're going to create a couple of things, okay? We're going to create a variable, okay? The name of the variable is going to be first name. Remember, how do you create a variable in Python? You just say first underscore name, and then you say it's equals to John, and then we say last name is equals to Snow. You can go ahead and type this, okay? There's no need for let, there's no need for var, there's no need for const, no need for all of that. Just type the name of your variable equals to and the value. The name of your variable equals to and the value. And then if you go back to your terminal and you create a new module. Okay, so I'm showing you how to create a module now in the terminal. Here we're going to call this importer, or we can call this, yeah, let's call this importer. Okay, importer.py. Okay, you can call it whatever you want, and then let's rename this one here exporter.py so it is easy for people to follow along. Okay, so in importer.file, we want to import the variables and the names that we created in exporter.py. Something very, 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 very important, very, very, very important. Your job as a programmer is to name things. That is what you're going to do. You're going to be naming things. Your job as a programmer is to name things. That's what you're going to be doing. You're going to be naming things, okay? Remember we said programmers are people that take data, wrangle it, and change from one form to another, okay? So if you're building an application and that application is supposed to store the information about all the Nigerians that exist in the world, you want to store their NIN, you want to store, we're going to take a look at some data structures that will allow you to do something like that. But most importantly, your job will be to name things, okay? Now, again, naming things in Python is very, very easy. There's not a lot of ways to name things, okay? As a matter of fact, there are 3 ways to name things in Python. Just 3 ways. It's super simple, super easy. Once you remember it, you're set for life. The first way to name something is what you did in the first file you created. First name is equals to John. So basically here you've created a unique name, okay, called first name. And then you created another unique name called last name. And then you set a value, okay? So you've said that you want to, wherever you see first name, okay, you want to, for this moment, call it John, and then last name, you want to make it Snow. And then you can create a new name and say the message is equals to you know nothing, okay? So you have the first name, you have the last name, and you have the message, okay? You have the first name, you have the last name, you have the message. So your job is to name things. The first way to name things is by actually saying my name is equals to this value. First way. What about the second way? The second way is to say define. And that is how you create functions. Is to say what? Define. Okay? Is to say define. The second way is to say define. Okay? Your job is to name things. So you can say define, say hello. Okay? And then this is the body of say hello. So basically what you've done here, you've said that this body here is equals to say hello. I want to define say hello as this body. Okay? That's it. You're creating a function. That is the second way that you name things in Python. Okay? The first way, you just basically say the name of your thing is equals to a value. The second way, you say, I want to define say hello. I'm going to give say hello a definition. So you say def, say hello, and then you give it a body. Okay? The third way to create things is to use the class. Say class, person, and you have now said that person is equals to whatever. So remember we said wherever you see this colon, in Python, think of it as is, okay? So if I see this, I'm going to think about it as is. So I'll say class person is everything that comes under it, okay? I'm defining say hello, and it is everything that comes underneath, okay? So when you see this, think of it as is. Then is there a question? If there's a question, you can type in the chat, and we're going to address that question. Okay, so we have here the 3 ways you can define something. You define it by giving it a name, okay? You define it by defining it with the def keyword. You define it by calling it, giving it a class, okay? Now, these are the 3 primary ways you define things in Python, okay? But there is a fourth, I said there are just three ways, and that's right, there are three ways, but there is a fourth way that you can kind of define something, okay? So we have defined this here in this exporter class, okay? Anywhere in this exporter class that I say print first name, what is going to be printed is John, okay? Anywhere I say print last name, what is going to be printed is Snow. Anywhere I say print message, what is going to be printed is you know nothing, okay? Then anywhere I say print say hello, what is going to be printed is the function, buddy. Anywhere I say print person, what is going to be printed is the class, buddy, okay? So we've defined a couple of names, and that's what you do as a developer. You define things, you name things, you identify things, you assign, you play with data, okay? So we have defined say hello, we have defined person, and there is a fourth kind of way. It is, well, you're not defining as much as you're bringing a definition that you had defined somewhere else. So let's come to importer. Now imagine we come down here and we say def middle name is equals to Tagarian, okay? Sorry, no, not def middle name, just middle name. Okay, middle name is equals to Tagarian, okay? Now, we've defined middle name using the first strategy of definition. Name equals to something. First strategy, name equals something. We've defined something, okay? In this case, what we defined is a string. Name equals to something. So the middle name is equals to a string. We can also come here and say age is equals to 50. And we can also come here and say is alive equals to false, depending on what version of Game of Thrones you're watching. Okay, so this is a Boolean, this is an integer, this is a string. We're defining all these things. But there's a way for us to also kind of define something. Well, not define it, but bring something that we have defined into this file. How are we going to do that? So in exporter, we defined first name, we defined last name, okay? And importer, we can say import first name from exporter, okay? But this is like, we are going to change this in a bit, okay? So I'm giving you like, from this exporter, we want to import first name, okay? Now, this is the way that we can go about doing it. But in Python, because Python reads like English, okay? We say from exporter, import first name, okay? Unlike JavaScript, where we say import this from that, in Python, we say, hey, from the exporter, I want you to import first name. So what did you just do here? You did not create a new first name because you already defined the first name in the exporter.py module. Remember, you created a module. In that module, you created some names, okay? Your job is to identify. So from the exporter.py module, you created first name, last name, and you said messages, you know nothing. You can go to another Python module. As a matter of fact, you can go to another Python package. As a matter of fact, you can install something that someone else wrote, and from that package, you can import the things that they defined, okay? And the minute you import them, once you import it, that name is available in this entire file, okay? So what are we saying? Let's not talk too much. Let's show a practical example. If we open the terminal and let's clear here and let's say Python importer.py, nothing happens. Why? No news is good news. So here, if I say print first name, okay, and I run it again, you see it prints John, okay? But first name is not here, first name is in exporter, okay? First name is in exporter. But if I say import first name and I say print, it gives me John. Why is that? Remember, 3 ways to define something. John equals to Snow, okay? Define say hello as a function. Okay, if you want to define a function, you use def. If you want to define a class, you use class. If you want to define a variable, you just say the variable name is equals to something. Okay? Let me repeat it for one more time for the people in the back. Okay? If you didn't quite get it, that's what I mean. If you want to, there are 3 ways to create names, okay? 3 ways to identify things in Python. The first way, you say name equals something. Name equals something. First way. Second way, you want to create a function, okay? You say def my function and then the body of the function, okay? You've defined the function as the body of the function, okay? The third way is to say a class. You've defined a class as the body of the class, okay? So we're going to take a look at the special syntax for functions and a special syntax for classes in a bit, okay? But for variables, I repeat, for variables, if you want to create a variable, if you want to store something and use it later, you just say the name is equals to a value. And we talked about the different values that exist. We talked about strings, we talked about numbers, we mentioned lists. In JavaScript, it's called arrays. We talked about dictionaries that are called objects in JavaScript, and the dictionaries in Python look a lot like JSON because you have to put them as the keys have to be strings, okay? Now, what do we mean by that? In JavaScript, you can say my data is equals to, you can say first name and then you can say 5. In Python, this is wrong because this has to be a string with single quotes, or a string with double quotes, or a string with triple quotes, okay? All these are strings. You can use triple quotes, you can use single quotes, you can use double quotes, okay? It has to be a valid data type, basically, okay? It has to be a valid data type. So it has to be a valid data type. It has to be a data type that is valid within the context, okay? So if you say Python importer, there's not a problem when you use a number, okay? It just has to be a valid data type. Now, we have said the way for you to create is for you to say the value is equals to something, for you to define, okay? And then give the body of the function, or for you to say class and give the body of the class, okay? That is how you create and you identify in Python, okay? So again, I'm going to repeat. You can say middle name is equals to Tigerian, age is equals to 50, is alive equals to false. This is the first style of defining things, okay? First style of defining things. And then again, if you want to create a comment in Python, you use hash, okay? First style of defining things. So middle name equals to Tigerian, age is equals to 50, is alive is equals to false. To prove and to show that we are actually, like, this is something that is easy for us to learn, if you know how to create, let's create a variable in the chat, okay? Let someone create a variable, call the variable account balance, and let the amount be equals to the account balance you want to have in your account by next year. Create a variable in the chat, call the variable account balance, and let the account balance be equals to the account balance that you want to have in your account next year. You don't have to put, it's going to be a number. We're going to assume that the account balance is in USD, okay? So we can go ahead and create it, or we can assume it in Naira or in Euro. You can just create it and then put on there after you've created it Euros or Naira or whatever. Do we understand the question that's been asked? Kidney. So I see someone type def account balance. That is one way, but that is a way for you to define a function, okay? That is a way for you to define a function. We're not trying to define a function, okay? We're saying how much money do you want to have in your account balance in 1 year from now, okay? Okay, so seeing as we are, now that is a function that prints account balance. In this case, it's going to throw an error, and we can take that function and show. Okay, so we come here, we say print, and then let's come here and let's paste that. First things first, account balance is not defined. Okay, so for us to print account, we first have to say account is equals to USD, balance is equals to, and then we can come here and say print account and balance. Okay, that's how you'd correct that. But the answer to the assignment is basically just saying account balance is equals to whatever amount of money you want in your account balance by next year. Okay, so it's as simple as that. Account balance is equals to a value. Okay, account balance is equals to a value. Okay, so that is the first way to create it. If you wanted to create for your name, okay, then you'd say name is equals to something. Okay, now there is actually a way for us to get input. If we do this, okay, if we do this and then we ran Python importer.py, you see here, like now the Python is asking us enter your name, and then whatever you type here, okay, it says hello biryani. Okay, so when you run importer, this function called input here asks you for your name on the terminal. When you type it in, it takes your name and it saves it into name here. Okay, and then we do this, which is string interpolation. Now that is a mouthful, so let's explain it piece by piece. Okay, in Python, when you want to create something, you say name is equals to, you say define, or you say class. The fourth way is you import something that you've done name is equals to, define, or class in another file. Okay? And then we showed how you import from another file in Python. Okay? We also showed how you install a package. And what is a package? A package is basically code that someone else has written. And I said I also have written some code and have put it online. It's on the Python package index, and you can go ahead and take a look at it. If you want to build a web application, then it makes it easy to build a web application. Okay? So when you want to build an application, chances are that you're going to need libraries from other people. Okay? To install this library, you need pip. Once you install Python, you should also get pip bundled with your installation. If you don't have pip, please raise your hand in the chat and then we'll get to it. Okay? So you install Python, you should get pip as well installed with your Python installation. Okay, so now let's move. Yes, Chila has raised his hand. You can type your question in the chat and or you can also unmute yourself and ask your question.
Okay, thanks. No, it's not a question. I just wanted to raise my hand to the thing.
Okay. Okay, so now moving on to the, so here we have the TBHI project, okay? And we're trying to build an application that allows volunteers to volunteer their time and also allows enablers to volunteer their services. And we talked about volunteers being individuals that want to donate their skills and enablers being people that want to donate their services. So we have a couple of modules that are here, and then we're going to explain what exactly is going on. Okay, so whenever you have a project, a Python project, what you're going to have, remember we said the only thing that exists in your computer, we said there are folders, okay? We said your computer has two things, folders and files. These are the only things that exist in your computer, okay? Folders and files. There is nothing else. There is no such thing as an application, nothing else, okay? You have folders, you have files. You have folders, you have files, okay? Nothing else exists in your application, on your operating system. Whenever you click on an application, if it's Google Chrome or whatever, it doesn't matter what you click, what actually happens is that application you clicked on is a file that takes you to another file. If it's a shortcut on your desktop or in your app drawer, it takes you to another file, and that file has application code that your operating system can execute and then show on screen. Okay? So what you have on your computer, just folders and files. So because the only thing you have on your computer, folders and files, it makes sense that when you want to create your own application, when you're trying to write your code, the only things that are going to exist in your code, your project folder, will be folders and files. And if you take a look in this place, you'll see what we're talking about. We have folders, and then we have files. We have folders and files. We have folders and files. Okay? Folders and files. And the folder is a location where files exist. So even these files are in the TBHHI folder. So you have folders and files. Folders and files. Okay, so moving on. So when you go into a project folder and you see a Python file, the Python file you see is called a module. And then we talked about how you can define variables in a module. We're repeating this because when we asked the question about defining a variable, not a lot of people could understand. When we said create a variable specifying how much you want to have in your bank account, what we saw, what was demonstrated instead was creating a function and not creating a variable. Okay? So when you have a Python file and Python, like when you have a Python file, the code that you write inside is Python code, and for you to execute that file, for that file to run, because Python is interpreted, remember we said that this is you, okay? You don't speak binary, you don't speak computer language, you speak English, like me, okay? Or maybe Spanish or whatever, okay? You speak English. You want to talk to the computer, but the computer speaks only binary, okay? The computer speaks ones and zeros. You speak English. How do you, when you speak only English, talk to a computer that speaks only binary? You get an intermediary. It's like if I don't speak French and I don't speak French, and I want to talk to someone that speaks French, I know a guy, I know someone, Rene Chukujike, I'm gonna get a hold of him and say, hey, I need to talk to XYZ and they speak just French. So I speak to Rene in English, he turns and then he speaks to XYZ in French, XYZ responds to him in French and he responds to me in English. In this case, Rene is my interpreter and the interpreter for XYZ. The same way a human interpreter will interpret between you and a third party that doesn't speak your language, that is the same way you need an interpreter to interpret between you and the computer that doesn't speak your language. Okay? In this case, that interpreter is Python. Okay? That interpreter is Python. You write your Python code in a .py file. That code gets translated to computer binary by Python. Python speaks Python that is like English, and then it also speaks binary, so it is able to translate your English into binary. So if you want to speak to the computer, you need to know Python. You write your code in Python, and Python is going to translate that code into binary. Okay? You write your code in Python, and Python is going to translate that code into binary. Now, when we are interpreting Python code, it starts from top to bottom. So how exactly do you tell Python that you want to interpret something to the computer? And I get coffee. Not this thing. This thing is not too good. It's not good now.
When are you starting to build the application?
Around the 30th hour. Okay, so if you want to execute a Python file, you're going to start from the top. And how do you tell Python that, hey, I want to interpret something to the computer that speaks ones and zeros? Now let me ask a question. Imagine that you are trying to speak to a friend of yours, okay, an old acquaintance, or a very close friend, a business partner, and they don't speak English. You can write what you want to tell them on a piece of paper. In my case, I write it on paper. I give the paper, I say, hey, Rene, can you take a look at this paper and translate it to French? Rene takes the paper, He opens it up, okay? He looks at it and then he says, okay, sure, I can do this. And then he translates it to French. And then he hands it over to the business partner or to the person that doesn't speak English. It's the same thing with Python on your computer. You write your letter in a Python module, like here, okay? This is where you write your Python code. And when you're done, you come to the terminal and then you say Python importer.py. Basically what you're saying here is, hey Python, interpret this file for the computer to run. The minute you say Python importer.py, the file is going to be interpreted for the computer to run. Okay, it's going to be interpreted and translated to something that the computer can understand. So Python is responsible then for interpreting the file from the language that you wrote here, okay, and then it converts that into a form that the computer can understand. Okay, so if I wanted to speak to someone, okay, and I don't speak Italian, but I know a guy, Cristoforo, speaks Italian, okay, and I want to have a conversation, I can write or I can say, hey Cristoforo, I want to tell this guy I really like the pasta they made. Cristoforo is going to speak to them in Italian, they respond in Italian, and he speaks to me in English. He's basically acting as my interpreter or the go-between between myself and the person that speaks Italian. That is exactly what Python is doing. Python is an interpreted language. Again, earlier in the tutorial, we were talking about how compiled languages are faster than interpreted languages, and we gave an example why. So, in the case of Python, you are going to write what you want Python to interpret in a file that ends with a .py extension or a Python module. And then when you want that file to be interpreted to the Italian that the computer speaks or to the French that the computer speaks, you're going to say Python, you give it the name of the file, Python is going to take the file, it's going to interpret that file, and it's going to say, hey computer, I have some code that I want you to run, and the computer is going to understand exactly what Python is saying, because Python is not speaking English or whatever you wrote, but it's speaking the language that the computer understands. I hope it is clear. If anyone has a question, please raise your hand, we can address it. Otherwise, we can continue on the flight, okay? So, now we have a Python file in front of us. How do we speak to the computer and have the computer do stuff? We need to understand the keywords that exist in Python. And once we understand the keywords that exist in Python, we need to understand the rules that exist so we can have a conversation with the Python interpreter. Again, whenever we say Python, think of Python like a human being, okay, a human interpreter that is basically waiting for you to speak Python, okay, because Python is a language, and then it's going to interpret that language and give it to the computer, and the computer is going to respond, and then it takes whatever feedback and gives it to you, okay? So for you to speak with this Python human or this Python interpreter, okay, you need to be able to speak Python. If I wanted to speak to to an interpreter that understands only French and Japanese, I need to be able to speak French or Japanese, okay? So in this case, we are learning Python, so we can write in Python. We need to know the keywords, and we need to know the rules. Now, in Python, there are a couple of keywords. You have def, you have a couple of reserved keywords, okay? Now, if you want to see all the reserved keywords, the best place to go is python.org. And you can see all the reserved keywords in Python. You have things like as, you have things like in, you have things like def, and so on and so forth. things like import. So all these reserved keywords, they have special meaning in Python. And then if you go ahead and then you try to use them, then you are speaking illegal Pythonese, for instance. So let's take a look at these Python reserved keywords together. Okay? Now, you don't have to remember all of them. As a programmer, and as you get better at programming, you are going to have to rely on Google a lot. Even after programming for years, you're still going to rely on Google. Chances are that you're even going to have to speak multiple programming, like learn multiple programming languages to be able to do your job effectively, okay? So, for instance, earlier, we took a look at JavaScript. We went through JavaScript, we showed how promises work, we showed how await async works, we talked about let, const, we talked about asynchronicity versus concurrency, and we went deep into JavaScript, okay? So when you, as an engineer, the more time you spend practicing the art of engineering, the more you realize that you shouldn't be aiming to store everything in your head. You should just store enough that would make you productive, and the rest you can always look it up if you need to, okay? So we can take a look at the reserved keywords for Python, and we want to take a look at it from python.org, okay? Now, we can also take a look at it from a couple of other places. Okay, so we have the list of keywords here, and this is the same kind of thing you'd see if you went to python.org. It's a table, but for sake of speed, we're just going to take a look at it from here. So here you have false, you have def, which we talked about earlier. We have is, okay, you have from, you have in, you have asset, you have class, you have or, you have pass, you have yield, try, return, raise. These are the reserved keywords in Python, okay? They have special meaning in Python. So if I wanted to write a Python application, I wouldn't go ahead. Remember we said your job as a programmer is to identify things. I wouldn't say that I want to identify something and then I'd say I want to create a name, and I'll say def is equals to, like, you see that it's not even going to work because here it's telling us it's an error. Def is a reserved keyword because it's how you define functions, okay? It's how you define functions and it's how you define methods. So it's a reserved keyword. As a result, I can't use it. I can use it as a name. I can't use it as a token, okay? Again, remember, your job as a programmer is to identify, okay, tokens, to wrangle data and transform it from one form to another. So if I wanted to create a token or a keyword to store a string, I'm better off giving it a more descriptive name. I'm better off giving it a name that if I were super tired and I had to come back to the project, just looking at the name would tell me what that value is supposed to be and what that variable is supposed to be about, okay? So, taking a look at the Python file in front of us, we need to know the keywords, we need to know what the rules are, and we need to understand, very, very important, we need to understand the syntax, we need to understand the rules, and we need to understand how Python works, okay? We need to understand how Python works. When you have a module like this, remember we said if you want this to be interpreted in your terminal, you say python importer.py, okay? And then the minute you do this, you see that nothing happens. We said python importer.py, but actually something happened. Python said, hey, you want me to translate this document? So Python steps into the importer.py file and it doesn't find anything. So it leaves, it exists, okay? It's like you call an interpreter, you say, hey, can you translate this letter for me? And then you give them a blank document, they're going to look at it, they won't do anything, like there's nothing to translate, leave, okay? So you can have multiple lines in your document. Python will start from the top and work its way all the way to the bottom, okay? Now remember we said that Python is space delimited, which means that it doesn't use curly braces. Like when we were going through the JavaScript tutorial, we were showing how what the scope of a variable is. If I have a function and I have the opening curly brace and I have the closing curly brace, where the scope of a variable that is defined in that function is and what the scope outside the function is, okay? Now in Python, you don't have the curly braces, you have the colon, and then space is used to define the scope of functions and the scope of classes, okay? So it's a space delimited language, and more importantly, we showed that if we type Python and we say import this, we get the Zen of Python telling us that beautiful is better than ugly and so on and so forth. That is to tell you that Python cares a lot about readability, okay? Python cares a lot about readability. So in that regard, we as engineers that want to write Python need to make sure that our code is readable. So this is, one, you understand what the keywords are, two, you understand the syntax, three, you understand how Python works. Python will enter the file, it will start from the top, work its way to the bottom, and then it's going to use the rules for formatting and indentation to see if it can interpret your document. Let's see what we mean. So we get into the Python file. Here we say raster is equals to true, okay? And then down here we say def my Rastafarian life, okay? And then we come down here and we say a plus, or we say 5 plus 3, and we say age is equals to 5 plus 3, okay? Already we can see there's a complaint just because of where we put the variable age is equals to 5 plus 3. Now what Python was expecting to see indentation. It was expecting to see you move to the right so that it can define the scope of my Rastafarian life. So we are trying to define my Rastafarian life, but we didn't use space to specify what the scope of my Rastafarian life is. And Python is going to complain because Python is space delimited. Okay? I'm going to repeat it. Python is space delimited. Okay. So, how do we solve this problem? Well, quite simple. Python really doesn't care about if you use 2 spaces or 3 spaces. There is the standard that you use 4 spaces because that is more readable. So if we just did tap tap and then we said PASS, okay, you see that it stops complaining. This is not 4 spaces, it's just 2 spaces, but it is enough for Python to understand that the scope of my Rastafarian life is from line 4 to line 5, and line 6 is completely different and outside of that scope because line 6 goes back to the beginning of that line, okay? So what does that say? It means that when Python enters a file, it starts from the top and then it goes from left to right, and as it goes from left to right, the minute it identifies that a new scope is about to begin, it is immediately going to start looking for space that it's going to use to identify where that scope starts and where that scope ends. Okay, so big word alert. We talked about scope. For those of us that were in the JavaScript class, we already understand what scope means, okay? For those of us that join only just the Python class, what do we mean when we say scope? Now, when Python enters this file, okay, in this file, if I create a new variable like I did on line 1, raster equals to true, then in this entire file, from line 1 all the way to line 19, wherever I type print raster, Python will know where to find raster, because in this file, raster has been defined. Okay? So scope is where a name is valid. Let me repeat. Scope is where a name is valid. But we can go back a step further. Earlier we said your job as a programmer is to name things. Your job as a programmer is to name things, okay? So you can name things by saying raster is equals to true. That's the first way of naming things in Python. You can name things by saying define, and then you give it a name, my Rastafarian life. You can name things by saying class, and you can say person, okay? And you can name things by importing from another file, okay? So whenever you name something, whenever you give something a name, you have identified the identity of that thing within a given scope. So scope is where a name is valid. Let's come to the exporter.py file. Here, if we said print raster, okay, Python will not be able, like, we're going to get an error. If we say Python, interpret the exporter.py file so the computer can understand, and we said enter, Python says, I don't know where to find raster. Raster is not defined. Raster is not defined. What does that tell us? Remember, your job as a programmer is to define, to identify things, okay? So for you to print raster, raster must be defined. But wait, raster is defined in the file importer.py, but not in the file exporter.py. So it means in the file exporter.py, raster is out of scope. Okay? The name raster is not defined. The name raster is not valid. So scope is where a name is valid. Is it understood? Are there any questions? Can we continue? If you have a question, please raise your hand and we can cover and make sure that you're up to speed. Awesome. Okay, so we can continue. Now, for us to bring raster into scope in exporter, we can do two things. Well, we can do a lot of things, but ideally we can do two things. The first one is we can define raster here and say raster is equals to whatever we want to make raster equals to. And then now raster has been defined, and so Python wouldn't complain. The second thing we can do is we can import raster, okay, from importer. But remember, Python is a very English-like language. So what are we going to do? In JavaScript, we say import from this. In Python, we say from importer import raster. So now we have brought raster into this scope. So now if we said in exporter.py, if we told Python again, hey Python, I want you to interpret this file for the computer to run, and we say exported py. Python says raster is true, okay? Python says raster is true, but something exciting happened. Something quite exciting happened. Whilst we were trying to import raster, we have true show up twice. We had true show up twice whilst we were trying to import raster, okay? Why did that happen? Well, we can come here and we can say this is exporter and raster. Now, when we say Python exporter, you see that this is exporter true. So when you say from importer import raster, this is telling us that Python is going to go into importer and then start reading from top to bottom, and whatever it sees, it's going to execute it. And here in raster, we have print raster. So when you say from exporter import raster, Python comes into the imported py file, it goes from top to bottom, it finds raster, and it executes raster. Okay? Is it clear? Are we following? Okay. So now we've talked about scope, and we said scope is where a name is valid. Scope is where a name is valid. We also talked about how to import items from a different scope into the current scope. Okay? So we've taken a quick look at scope. We've also taken a quick look at what happens when you go into a Python file, and we've also taken a quick look at some reserved keywords. Okay? We've taken a look at some reserved keywords. Now, let's go ahead and dive a little bit deeper into the fundamentals of Python. The minute Python enters a module, it starts from top to bottom, okay? Who can tell us in the chat, how does Python, how can you create a variable in Python? Anyone? How do you create a variable? It's quite simple. You say variable name is equals to value. Simple as that. Variable name is equals to value. Okay? Now, how do you define names in Python? First one, variable name equals to value. Second one, define some function, okay, and the body. Third one, class, person, and body, okay? And last but not least, you can import something that has been defined somewhere else into the current scope. Is it clear? Are we all understanding what is going on? Do we need to Okay, so moving on. So we're going to have to move on from fundamentals of Python and move into some more advanced topics in Python. And to do that, we're going to need to have some exercises. We're going to need to have some exercises. So your mission, should you choose to accept it, for the next 4 minutes, I want as many people as possible, as you can, to go into the chat again, create a variable. The name of the variable should be account balance, and you set the amount to the account balance you want to see in your account. That's the first assignment, okay? The second assignment is to create a function, okay? And the answers are on the screen, by the way. So you can just go ahead and type it out in your VS Code. Beautiful. Thanks, Amanda. So you can go ahead and type it in your VS Code and copy and paste. Wonderful, 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 wonderful. So we have the account balance is equals to 234, wonderful. And then we have the definition where we find some function, and then we have the class where we define the class, okay? Now, there are a couple of more advanced data types, and we're going to be taking a look at them. Thank you, Toye. It's wonderful. It's a good account balance. Okay, so we're going to be taking a look at packages next, and we're going to be creating some packages. We're going to be creating modules in these packages, and as we're creating modules in packages, we're going to be importing from different modules and importing from different packages. We're also going to talk about the path, okay? We're going to talk about the Python path, and we're going to talk about what the path actually is. We're going to simplify it a lot so it is understandable to people without a programming background. And then after we have simplified it, then we are going to go into what actually happens when you say from some library import XYZ, okay? Now, right now we have the virtual environment activated. For those of us that were not around, okay, the virtual environment is something that we created. Now, we created it by saying Python 3 make virtual environment, and we said .env, okay? Python 3 make module venv.env, okay? So we created a virtual environment, and then we activated the virtual environment, and then we installed Heaven into the virtual environment. Now, Heaven is a library that I created to assist new programmers like yourself learn to build web applications. It's like the 5th fastest Python web framework, according to benchmarks. You can take a look at it. And it is stupid simple. It is very, 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 very simple, okay? So I created a package, I pushed it on PyPy. I also opened PyPy and I showed you how to search for packages in PyPy. You can also create packages and push on PyPy. Anyone can go on PyPy and create packages and push on PyPy. You can put it on your GitHub and then hopefully you're going to get some stars. Okay? So we installed Heaven in this virtual environment and then we're importing Heaven. But what exactly happens when you type Python in your terminal? How is it that your operating system knows what Python is and knows how to find Python? We're going to simplify the whole concept of your operating system path, and then you're going to understand what the path is. Now, on a Windows computer, it is easier to describe what exactly is going on. Is there someone with a Windows computer so we can go in and they can share their screen? I don't think you can share your screen. We disabled sharing screens because of some spam learners that we had. They were showing vulgar content, but we're going to try and simplify it anyways. So when you switch on your computer, okay? When you switch on your computer, the minute electricity, this is an oversimplification, but it's going to help you understand what exactly is going on. The minute electricity comes into your computer, there are a set of instructions stored in the computer that tell how to boot up your operating system, how to get things started, okay, and how to get things set up. So think about it this way. Electricity comes into your computer. Electricity comes into your computer and then there are instructions that says, hey, there is a hard disk attached or there is a location attached, and in that location there is a butler or a wonderful fellow called the operating system. Go meet that guy or go meet that girl and then ask them what to do next. So your computer, the flow goes to the operating system and the operating system says, hey, I see that you have this installed, I see that you have installed, I see you have a display, I have a couple of applications that can run, and then it goes about showing you the desktop and showing you a couple of things, okay? So the operating system boots up because there's instruction that says how to go about booting the whole computer up. Again, an oversimplification. Now, after your operating system boots up, okay, it needs to know where to find the applications that it will use to open the different files it encounters in the day-to-day activities that you use it or you put through. Now, in Windows, you have something called registry. So we're going to explain this again, this concept. Think about it like a hotel that exists in your computer, where applications can go and lodge and tell the operating system, if you see a file that ends in .pdf, I'm your guy. Come call me, I'm lodged in room 307. Where room 307 is a path that exists on your hard disk, okay? Room 307 is like a path to some location on your hard disk. On Windows, it'll be your C program files, for instance. And then when you install, so if you have a brand new computer and you don't have any application that can open that MP4 files, and then you put an MP4 file on your computer, it wouldn't know what to do with it, okay? The computer is dumb like that. It wouldn't know what to do with it. But when you install an application that can open .mp4 files, that application goes to the hotel in your computer and says, hey, but if you see any file that ends with .mp4, I'm your gal. Come to room 301, you'll find me there. Hand the file to me, I'll interpret it. Okay? We covered this in earlier sessions. Now, if you have 3 different applications that have registered, whenever you encounter an MP4 file and you say open, the computer will ask you, hey, I find 3 different applications that can open this file. Which one do you want to use and which one should I set as a default? Some of you might have encountered this sometime. So basically that's how your operating system knows what to do, okay, when it encounters some files. But that is when you install a file. What about when you actually boot up your computer from scratch? If you open the terminal as it currently exists, let's take out this, and if I type ls, ls is able to run, okay, because of a couple of things like the path, but let's simplify it a little bit. Now, when your operating system boots up, okay, there are a couple of locations where there are files, okay? Every single, again, remember, every single thing on your computer is a file or a folder. The applications on your computer are just files, okay? When you open an application, when you double click to open an application, it's a set of instructions and a file that has been executed. We've covered that in the past, okay? So there are a couple of files that your operating system says, as your operating system is booting up, okay? So imagine the butler, the instruction that you got when your computer came on said, go to so place you find operating system. In that place where the operating system is, there are a couple of files that the operating system knows. Like they can be your ls, they can be your make directory, they can be your remove directory. There are a couple of files that the operating system knows where they are. So when you type ls or list, because the operating system comes from the same folder where they are, the operating system is able to find them, okay? But what if the operating system cannot find that file, okay? That is where the path comes in. The path is like a bulletin board. Think about it like a notice board that your operating system goes to look at so that it can find commands that are not in its current folder where it booted or where it came out from, okay? So there are a couple of files that are in the folder that the operating system came out from, and so it's able to find those, and there are a couple of other locations that your operating system knows that I can go and find things, okay? So the path is a collection of all the folders where your operating system is going to look when you type a command that you want it to execute. And if it looks in all those folders and it doesn't find that command, it will tell you, yeah, I didn't find it. It will give up the ghost and it will turn the other way and die. Well, it won't die, but you get the gist. So we can come here, for instance, and we can say something like hubris. Now, command not found, hubris. What just happened? The operating system went through all the locations where it could, like that on the path, okay? Remember the path is just like a collection of folders. It went through all those locations and it didn't find any command called hubris. Now, it is possible that I can create a file right now, and then I can add the file and the location where that file is to the path, and when I type hubris, the operating system will go through all the folders and then it will see where hubris is, and then it will find it and it will execute it. So the path is a collection of all the folders your operating system is going to walk through, starting from where it was woken up from until it finds the necessary command that it needs to run. When you install things like Python, or you install maybe Golang, or you install a couple of other tools, usually you add them to your path, okay? You add either a link to the application in your user/local/bin or your bin dir, or in Windows to your program file, so you go to your path and you edit it, and then your operating system is able to walk through and find the necessary application. When you type Python in your terminal, that's what happens. Whew, that's a lot of typing, a lot of talking, okay? So does anyone not understand what the path is and how the path works? Please raise your hand and I'll ask you a question and I will explain. I see a couple of thumbs up. It means that the talking was 100% worth it. Awesome, love it. Executing what it sees as it goes along. So when we have we say Python interpret this file for me, Python goes into that file. If it sees import something, it will go to that file. If that file imports something, it will just, like, it will walk the entire collection of files you have, executing code as it goes along until it comes back, and then it executes the code that you set for it, okay? So, having had all this knowledge, let's write some code. Let's write some code. Okay? So here we have a Python file. Okay? Remember we said it's going to start from top to bottom. What do we need to do? If we want to create an application in Python, we need to understand what the reserved keywords are. There's not a lot of them, there's just a few of them. You have none, false, true, and, as, accept, break, class, from, or, not, non-local, lambda, yield, with, while, try, return, raise, if, def. Delete, elif, else, except, finally, and from. Okay, we'll continue. These are the Python reserved keywords, okay? You don't want to use those keywords as your variable names. Apart from those keywords, you can use any token as a variable name. You can come here and you can say token is equals to 4, but you cannot say def is equals to 5, because def is a reserved keyword. You cannot say yield is equals to 5, because yield is a reserved keyword. Okay? You cannot say def, because def is a reserved keyword. Okay? You cannot reassign. So you need to stay clear away from all the keywords. And the beautiful thing is Python is going to tell you when you're trying to use a reserved keyword. Okay? So, is that a question? Okay. So, moving on. Okay? Now, when you have Python installed, and you want to, there are different data types. There's the int, there's a string, there are a couple of them, okay? We talked about how do you import, and there are a couple of things as well that you need to know. So if you want to work with dates, for instance, you need to know where to import specific things, okay? If you want to work with dates, then you have to know that from date time, you need to import date time, okay? For instance, and you need to understand how that datetime works, okay? You need to understand how a date works. There are things like the time zone and a couple of other things, and we're going to get to that in a bit, okay? But let's take a look at a very important aspect of Python called functions. How do you create a Python function? We've talked about variables. Everyone should know how to create a variable. You say name is equals to value, okay? That's it, that's a variable. Okay? How do you then create a Python function? You say def name of function, and then you open parentheses, you close parentheses, you put your is, and then you pass the body of the function. Okay? Now, from the point where you define this function to the point where the cursor comes back to the beginning of the line, that is the body of your function. So if we did this, all this empty space is a part of this function up until you come back to the beginning on line 14. So if we minimize this, all this empty space is the body of the function. Okay? So from the point where the function starts to the point where it returns to the body of the function, that is all part of the function body. Okay? So here we have the define name of function, and then you specify the body of the function. Now, functions in JavaScript accept parameters. Functions in Python also accept parameters. What is a parameter? A parameter is a way you tell a function what to do. A parameter is the way you pass data, into a function, and that data that you pass into a function can be used within the body of the function. So earlier we talked about how the scope is where a name is valid. Inside here, okay, if you create a parameter here, so let's say we say age, okay, and we say this is an int, and we say name, this is a string, okay, and this function returns a string. We can come here and we can say something like return function completed, okay. Now inside of this function body, the data that has been passed in, like the age, is only valid inside here. If we came down here and we said print age, you get an error. Or you said print name, you get an error. Why is that? Because the scope of the function has ended. The scope of the function has ended. So the data is only valid inside the body of the function. When you pass parameters into a function, okay, it's only valid within the scope. And everything you pass inside this function, okay, is available inside here. So if we said print age and we said print name, whatever you passed into name of function would be available here, but the minute the function body finishes, halas, it's gone. Okay? You're done. So, what exactly is going on? If we can come here and we can say printer, and then if we said printer 45 John, what would happen when we called this printer? We would see 45, then we would see John, and then we would get function completed, returned, or we can also print that as well. Okay? So when you call printer, you will get age printed, name printed, and then the function completed will be printed as well. And we can go ahead and try it. We can say Python interpret exporter.py. Okay? 45, John, function completed. Exactly how we thought it would be. No surprises there. Okay, so we are going to have an exercise where someone has to create a function. Remember, you specify, you say def space name of function parenthesis, and then you can put pass. Okay? Who is going to create this function for us? Lovely, lovely Toya. Print me. Exactly. So to create a function, you create, we said that you define the name of the function and then the body of the function follows. Okay? Now, the last exercise that we're going to do will be to create a class. Now, a class and a function have the same kind of signature. The only difference is that the class uses a capital, okay? And the function uses a lowercase, okay? The class would use capital. The function uses lowercase or true, okay? Once you change, if you change this to class and change this to printer, you have a class, okay? Now, so you say class, person, and then you can put pass. Now, the syntax for a class is more nuanced, of course. There are more things in the class, but when we get into object-oriented programming, we're going to take a look at that. So we know how to define variables. We know how to define functions. We already showed how to define a function. Now we're going to take a look at the Python standard library. Okay, some of the things that you can import. So there is something that we need to address. Remember we said, I speak English, I don't speak Italian. I want to talk to someone that speaks Italian, or I want to talk to someone that speaks French, but I don't speak French. I know someone that speaks French, I will speak to them in English, they speak to the person in French, and they're act as an interpreter. Same thing with Python. Python is the guy that speaks machine language, so I can say, hey Python, interpret this exporter.py file for me, and then it's going to interpret it to the computer, and then the computer is going to respond, and yada yada yada. Okay, that is clear. So, but when Python enters into a file, Python doesn't enter alone. Python enters with its goons. It enters with its squad. It enters with a couple of tokens or a couple of things that it already has. Like it doesn't need to go look for. Like those things are already in scope. So the minute Python enters into a file, there are a couple of things that Python comes with. As Python is stepping into the file, it is stepping into the file with its goons. It's stepping into the file with its squad. So Python comes into the file and it says, yo, what's going on? What's going on? And then it sees, for instance, if we say here, okay, print, enter your, or we say print, this is a greeting exercise, okay? And then we say name is equals to input, okay? What is your name? And then we say print hello name, okay? So the minute Python enters this file, Python doesn't need to say where is print or where is input, because these are the goons that Python comes with, okay? These are the tokens, these are the names that Python steps into the file with, okay? You don't need to import them, okay? You don't need to create them. Python already comes with them. The minute Python steps into a file, you better believe it's coming with its bodyguard, it's coming with print, it's coming with input. So if we said, hey Python, interpret this file for us, Python is going to say, Python exporter.py. This is a greeting exercise. What is your name? And then I say, it says hello CDOF, okay? So I didn't need to import input. I didn't need to import print, okay? These are globals. Python always comes with them, okay? Python always steps into a file with these tokens. The minute Python is stepping into a file, these tokens are there. However, there are things that don't exist that I have to import, okay? So one of those things is, for instance, imagine I wanted to pass a command to tell Python how to run this file. Okay? I will need
Fucking nigga.
So we're going to have to kick people out of the room again. We're going to have to kick some people out of the room and also prevent the sharing of screens, because this is one of the unfortunate side effects of having a free training online. You have all manner of nefarious people jump in to try to hijack and derail what is being lent. So, okay, if you unmute your microphone and try to share vulgar content, you will be kicked out, you will be reported to Google, and most likely banned. Okay, so let's move on with the exercise. Okay, and then we talked about what a package is earlier, and we gave an example of how to create a package and the special file that is needed to create a package. Date is datetime.now. Okay, and then if we call Python to execute this for us, we say, what's your name? And then we say, and then you say, hello Tato, today's date is 2024 10:02, and it gives the time, okay? So it would be impossible for this to work if we did not import datetime from datetime. If we try to run this, we're going to run into an error at the point we type in our name, okay? So what we said, Python goes into the file, it starts executing from top to bottom. Because it is an interpreted language, it's not a compiled language. If it were a compiled language, you would get an error because this file would first be compiled, and then the compiler would say datetime doesn't exist. What are you doing? Like, are you okay? Like, bring datetime into scope, okay? But because it is an interpreted language, Python steps into the file super eager. It goes to print it, goes to line 2, nothing to do here. Goes to line 3, oh, you want to print something. It converts that to machine code and gives to the computer. The computer says, this is a grading exercise. It says line 5, name is equals to input. It computes it into machine code. The computer says, hey, give me your name. And then when you provide your name, it's going to go to line 6 and cry like a baby. So let's go ahead and see what's going to happen, okay? So here we say, our name is Anna, and it says, datetime is not defined. Did you forget to import datetime? See here that because it is an interpreted until you're actually running the application. So you could have an error somewhere in your code. It won't be found out until the application is actually running, okay? So now we can move, take a look at asynchronous functions. Now, how many of us were around when we're talking about JavaScript and we used the async and the await keyword? If you're here from the JavaScript tutorial, then this will make a whole lot of sense. If you're not here from JavaScript, we're going to cover it again, don't worry. We'll take our time to try and make sure that we are as thorough as possible, okay? We're as thorough as possible. So, moving in, okay? We have here something called async def download. What is this async? Now, we're going to briefly touch on asynchronicity versus something happen in tandem concurrently, okay? In the world of asynchronicity, the cook rice and you want to clean your apartment. There is only one of you, okay? So you put the rice on the fire, and the time it takes the rice to boil, you go and you start cleaning your apartment, okay? So that is performing an asynchronous task, okay? That is performing an asynchronous task. So the way it works, think of it like a loop. So you go into the living room, then you go into the bedroom, then you go into the bathroom, and you come back to the kitchen to check on it, then you go to the living room, then you go to the bedroom, then you go to the bathroom, and you come back to the kitchen to check on it. Like, you're going around and cleaning as you go around, okay? It's usually the best way that asynchronous, like there's some sort of loop. In this case, for heaven, there is something called the UV loop, an ultra-fast loop, but it's just one of you, okay? Only one of you, and you have multiple things to do. Whilst you wait for something to complete, you can do something else, okay? That is asynchronous. Concurrent, okay, is you want to clean your house and you want to cook, and there are two of you. So one of you is cooking and then adding the seasoning, and one of you is cleaning the house, okay? Those two things are happen at the same time, independently of each other. So if you were to kick your leg on a stone and not be able to come back to cooking the rice, it wouldn't get burnt, for instance, okay? So when something is asynchronous, let's think about it for a minute. Now imagine it takes 30 minutes to boil rice, and it takes 30 minutes to clean the apartment. The total time it will take you to boil rice and clean the apartment, 30 minutes, okay? Because you put the rice on the fire, while the rice is boiling, you're cleaning the apartment, and you finish both at the same time, okay? Now, in many instances, the work that your computer does yields itself naturally to asynchronous operations, because you're either saving to a database, reading from a database, fetching something from the internet, or doing something that you don't have to wait for. Imagine you want to fetch a website. The minute you send the request off to the internet, your processor can go do something else until the response comes from the website. So like for any place where you have input, output, or something is flushing to disk, like something is happening somewhere else, your computer yields naturally to asynchronicity. So you can have an asynchronous operation that works fast. However, let's use a different scenario. Imagine that you are counting, okay? You need to count beans, okay? You need to pick beans, and then you need to clean your house. You cannot pick beans and be cleaning your house at the same time, okay? You're doing something that is actually taking your compute time, like it's actually actively engaging you. And so if it's one of you and picking beans takes 30 minutes and cleaning your apartment takes 30 minutes, then the total time is going to take you is going to be 1 hour or 60 minutes, because you have to finish picking beans before you go clean your apartment, okay? So that is the difference between asynchronous, okay? When it's something that you can put on the fire, for instance, and then clean, then asynchronous works perfectly. And for many cases, building web applications and dealing with things that have to do with the web, there's a lot of asynchronous operations going on, so you can use asynchronous to get speed. Now, if you have to do some manual heavy compute task, like your processor or your computer has to count from 1 to 1 billion, then you need to actually use multiple processors. And many computers nowadays have multiple cores, so you can have one processor counting, you can have another processor cleaning the apartment, and then it's going to save you time, okay? Is it clear? Is there someone that doesn't understand the difference between what we just explained? Okay. So, how do you tell your computer that it's okay, go ahead and do what you want to do? I am going to go off, and then once I'm done boiling this rice, I'll let you know. Well, you basically tell your computer, I'll wait, okay? So inside here, for instance, inside this download, okay, I might want to download something, okay? I might want to download something, so I'll say something like, downloader is equals to context dot downloader, for instance. And don't worry, we'll explain what this all means in a minute. And then I can say await downloader dot download, and I give it a file extension. Okay? Now, when I say await, I am basically telling the computer, look, wait for me asynchronously. Don't sit here and wait for me, okay? This is an asynchronous wait operation. Like, go do something else. I am going to download something. Now, the minute your computer enters this function and sees await downloaded the download, it says, see you later, and it goes to do other things. When it comes back around, remember we said, like, you put the beans on the fire, and then you go clean the living room, you clean the bedroom, you clean the bathroom, and then you come back to check on the fire. By the time you go around, the processor goes around and comes back. If the rice is done, you take it down. If it's not, you go around and you keep cleaning, and then you come back again. So that's what happens. So it goes in the loop, and if it comes back and it's finished downloading, then it continues the processing, and then anything that you're doing at this point, let's say you want to print, I have downloaded, for instance, like that is going to start happening after this has been completed. Does that make sense? Is it clear? So when you say await, you're telling the computer wait asynchronously. Don't just sit and wait whilst I do this. Wait asynchronously. Okay? Wait asynchronously. Don't sit around and watch me. Just wait asynchronously. Okay. So now, but there's a catch. There is a catch. You just can't come into any folder and say await. Like, don't wait for me. Okay? You need to tell the processor or the computer, in this case, that this function is a function that can be called asynchronously. So in other words, if we have a function here that doesn't have async in front of it, and we say download sync, we can't come inside here and say await downloader, because this is not an asynchronous function. We did not specify or mark that this function has the capability to work asynchronously. Okay? Remember, asynchronous is you cleaning your apartment and boiling rice at the same time. Okay? You need to specify that rice is something that can be done without you sitting down and looking at it and watching whilst it boils. You can go do something else. The way you do that is by marking async. Okay, you say this function has the capability to be an async function. Okay, so if you don't mark it async, then you cannot. You see here, await only allowed within async function. So it needs to be an async function for you to signal to the processor that, hey, don't wait synchronously for this task, go do something else. Okay? So, there we go. And we can delete this, or we can come here and say async, and then that solves that problem. Okay? So, that is an async function, and that is how it differs from a sync function. Okay? So we're going to take a look at functional programming with Python, and then we're going to go into object-oriented programming with Python. Okay? After we have gotten some experience under our belt for how functions work, for how variables are defined, for how to define an array or a list, and how to define dictionary and how to get data from a dictionary, about zero indexing, around slicing, and around a couple of fun APIs that these data structures avail us. Okay? Now, remember we talked about API in the JavaScript class. If you're just joining, maybe we'll talk about it again after some time has elapsed. so that we are in line with the requirement from the Guinness World Record that we don't repeat topics in quick succession. So we're going to touch on APIs again, but maybe after some time has elapsed. Okay, so now we have a couple of async functions here that we have identified, okay? And then we are going to open this main file. Now, one of the things that I want to help us cultivate is the tendency to read documentation. The tendency to read documentation. Now, we had earlier talked about what happens when your browser goes to a website. We talked about the domain name system, domain name servers. We talked about what IP addresses are, why the domain, like the whole domain name system is necessary. We talked about what is actually going on behind the scenes and the nature of a HTTP request and what is involved in the data that is sent. We took a look at HTTP methods. We talked about post. We talked about delete. We talked about get. We talked about patch. We talked about put. And we said when we get to the Python section, we're going to revisit all of these things that we talked about so that it's cemented. Okay? So now's the time to make good on that promise and have a deeper dive into what actually goes on when your web browser tries to go to a web page, what is going on behind the scenes. And there's a lot more that goes on with handshakes and content negotiation and whatnot, like the traversal and the hops from your computer to the computer where it has to go to. But to simplify it and to recap, think of your computer like a phone, and then think of google.com like a contact in your phone book. Now, every computer on the internet has an IP address. Think of an IP address as the phone number for the contact in your phone book. If I told you to remember the phone numbers of everyone in your phone book, it's going to be a tall order. But if I said, hey, call Carlos, okay, call Carlos Yan, you could go into your phone book, type Carlos Yan, press enter, and then the phone book would look up the phone number and then call Carlos Yan, and then you'll be talking to Carlos Yan in no time, okay? Similar concept, okay? Similar concept, oversimplified, but similar concept with the whole domain name resolution and whatnot. Instead of you remembering the phone number, in this case the IP address, for Google, all you need to do is remember google.com. And we took a look at what that entails, and we said Command J, and then we're going to do here clear. We say ping google.com, and then you see that we get response from 216.58.223.206. Now, if we copy that IP address and we come in here and we paste that IP address, you see that it takes us to google.com. So the IP address is like the phone number, okay, for the website. So you don't need to remember, because if I told you, hey, remember this number whenever you wanted to go to google.com, many of us wouldn't even bother, because it's like too much of a hassle, okay? Alphabets and text is easier for our brains to grok. Is it clear? Is there anyone that did not understand it? Do we need to go over it again? Okay, no news is good news. We can continue. So, what happens when you type in the domain name in your web browser, okay, is that your web browser goes to the phone book for the internet, okay, the domain name server, the domain name system, okay, and then it gets the phone number for the website you're trying to visit, google.com, facebook.com, workstation.ng, like it gets that IP address, and then it calls the phone number, or it calls the IP address, and the IP is connected to a server or a computer, and that computer will send back a HTML file. Your browser is a glorified document viewer. It sends back a HTML file. In the HTML section, we designed a HTML file, we added CSS styles, we added some JavaScript behavior, we took a look at Alpine.js, we took a look at how to filter data, how to search for data, so we could search for volunteers by name, via email, via company, like we implemented all of that in the HTML tutorial. So it gives you a HTML file. That HTML file can have access to CSS links, can have access to images. We showed images, we showed how to style them, how to make them bigger, how to make them smaller, again in the HTML tutorial. So it gives you a HTML file, okay? So that HTML file that you receive has links to CSS documents or cascading style sheets. And we talked about how cascading style sheets style your page and make it beautiful, okay? So web servers respond with a HTML file. Now, there are two ways to go about it. One is you create a HTML file. Two is an application, which can be Python, can be PHP, can be Java, can be Golang, can be any of the programming languages, will create that HTML file for you based on the information that has been provided. Sometimes, if you go to a website for the US market, you will get a different website than if you went to a website for the Middle East market. Because in the Middle East, maybe you have right to left instead of left to right, so the CSS styling and a couple of things will be different. Okay? So, depending on where you are coming from, it is possible that you will get a different kind of website. Most times you'll even get a different website just because of the language is different and a couple of other things. So you want an application to do the actual work of building that website instead of building a website for Lagos, for Nigeria, building a website for Ghana, building a website for Gabon, building a website for Spain, building a website for Germany. Like you have an application that does the actual generation of the website. Okay? So the application that sits on that IP address to respond is called your server. This application that you see right here is a type of that application that actually responds to HTTP requests. It responds to HTTP requests. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at this application and try to explain what is going on in this file, okay? First things first, we say from heaven import app. Earlier, you saw where we used pip to install heaven, and we're going to use pip to install a couple of other things as well. We're going to use pip to install the database libraries that we need to connect to the database, because we're going to take a look at SQL down the line, okay? We're going to use pip to install the libraries that we need to parse JSON data, the library that we need to make sure that the passwords are stored in the database in a format that if someone broke into the database, they won't be able to steal passwords or guess what someone's password is, but it can still be used to verify your account, and we'll show how all of this works over the course of this tutorial, okay? So one of the first things that you need to understand, okay, is when you say pip install, remember we talked about the path. We talked about how the path is the location that your operating system goes to look, okay? When you activate a virtual environment kind of hacks the path so that what you're looking for first goes into the location where your virtual environment exists, and if it's not found there, then it goes outside, okay? So we have created a virtual environment, and then we are going to install the libraries that we want to use in this virtual environment. Why is this important? Imagine that you're working, like after this tutorial, you know Python, because we're going to take a look at what is going on here. We'll explain, and you know Python to a degree where you can start building applications for companies, and then a company comes and says, build a sports website, and then you're using Django, and then somebody else comes and says, build a school website, and then you're using Flask, and someone else comes and says, build this, and then you're using Pedantic version 4, in another place you're using Pedantic version 5. Like, your computer will become cluttered because you're installing all these Python packages in one place. What a virtual environment does it says, look, instead of installing all your Python packages in one place, why don't you create a folder such that if you're working for a school, the libraries you're installing are only in the folder related to that project for the school. And if you're working for a hospital, the libraries you're installing are only within the context of that hospital. So it doesn't trickle over into different places. And so you can have different packages in different folders, and you can install Python. Because imagine you're working on a data science project and you're installing very large AI libraries. You don't want to clutter your development environment every time you're trying to open a Python file. All these large libraries should be loading, so you can put it in a separate folder. Okay, that's what a virtual environment is. We already covered how to install the virtual environment, so we're going to move on. So when we come here and we say from heaven, import app, remember in Python, we talked about scope. And we said that whenever you enter a file, there is a scope in that file, and there are names that need to be available in that file. So we're saying from heaven, import app, but then we come down here and we say blog is equals to blog. But this blog here is in all caps, and this careers here is also in all caps. Why are we doing that? Now, in Python, whenever you see a variable, whenever you see a name, and the name is screaming like this, in all caps, okay, all the characters are capitalized, not carriers like this, okay, not carriers like this, but everything is capitalized like this, then what you're saying is that I want this to be defined as a constant, okay? I want this to be defined as a constant. So what that means, for those of us that are coming from the JavaScript land, remember when we were talking about JavaScript, we talked about how if you want to have a constant, you say const value is equals to something that does not change, okay? In Python, the way we signify something should not change is we make the variable names all capital. We scream the variable name, okay? It doesn't stop you from changing it, because again, Python doesn't have the concept of const, let, var, none of that complicated nonsense, okay? So just because you declared something in all caps doesn't mean that it cannot be changed. It can be changed. It's just that if you change it, myself and all the Python engineers in the world will appear in front of your house, will kidnap you, will take you to the Python committee, will remove your Python badge and take you back home, okay? So don't do it, okay? The convention is if you create a variable in all caps, it is a constant and it's not going to change, okay? And usually you do this because imagine that for some reason this has to change from careers to jobs, okay? If we used the string here, careers, and we used another string here called careers, wherever we have careers, we're going to have to come here and change to jobs, and then change to jobs. And everywhere there is a career, we're going to have to go and change to jobs. But the benefit of using constant is that once you change it just here to jobs, then everywhere where you find careers, it has changed as well, okay? So whenever you see a variable with all caps in Python, that is a constant. So we're going to have a very simple exercise. I want everyone to create a variable, a constant, okay? Name the constant whatever you want, and it should be a string constant, okay? create a constant create a string constant create a string constant here in the chat. One more minute. Do we have anyone that is facing difficulty? As you type code, it sticks. Create a string constant here in the chat. Anyone? James, Josephine, Victor? Zainab? Okay, so const greeting is equals to hello world. Now, that is JavaScript, okay? That is JavaScript. For Python, you just make the greeting capital, and that is all. Like this. Okay? Just make the greeting capital and you have a constant. There is no need for const greeting. There's no need for var age. There's no need for let num. None of that. You just say num is equals to 5. Okay? For Python, when you create a type, the interpreter is smart enough to understand what type you're assigning to a variable and save it. And then because you can reassign it anyways, you don't get a lot of issues. So just make the name of your variable capital and you have a constant. Okay? Make the name of your variable capital and you have a constant. So let's take a look at what goes on when you have what exactly is happening here with app. Okay? For us to understand what is happening with app, we have to take a quick detour into the world of object-oriented programming. Now this is bound to be fun. We're going to take a quick lesson into the world of object-oriented programming. Okay, object-oriented programming. Let's dive in. Is there anyone that has experience with OOP before in maybe other languages? So, in the world of Python, okay, one more time for the people in the back. When you enter into a file, you can create tokens, you can create variables, okay? These tokens can be variables, they can be functions, they can be classes. Okay? They can be functions, they can be classes. Now, what exactly happens when you step into a Python file, you start from top to bottom, okay? And then we talked about functions, we talked about variables, okay? We said the convention for creating constants. Now we're going to take a look at classes, okay? What exactly is a class? Why is a class important? What is a function? Why is a function important? What is the difference between a function and a method? What is the difference between a function and a method? And then what is a class? Okay? So, object-oriented programming is a style of programming where the solution that is built to simulate the way the world supposedly exists. Now, in the world, you have a house, you have a car, okay? You have a job, like all these things can be represented as objects. So you can, the idea is that you create a house in your code, and then you can describe the house in your code, okay? So let's stand for this, so we are energized and we can describe what is going on with object-oriented programming. Okay, so you have a house, okay? Now, imagine that I told you to build a program, and this program you're building should store the information about your house, okay? There are two ways to go about this. First way, and people, you can go ahead and tell me attributes that about your dream house, okay? So, number one, we can say the type of house, okay? Is it a bungalow? Okay? It could also be a duplex, okay? So, what kind of house do you have? It could be an apartment and a penthouse, whatever, okay? The next thing we could say is the number of rooms that you have in the house, okay? The next thing is the number of bedrooms, okay? And then we can say something like the number of floors that your house has, okay? The number of garages, like the parking space that it has, the number of living rooms that the house has, the number of kitchens that the house has, and the number of bedrooms that the house has, and the number of toilets that it has, and the number of dining rooms, and we can go on number of study rooms, number of storerooms, number of guest rooms, and we can go on and on, okay? And for here, like that, maybe that's like your boys' quarters, okay? And then, so, now, what does this, like this is a program, for instance, to store information about your house, okay? But it doesn't look like a well-engineered program because we're storing everything about your house in different variables. Now, imagine I told you to do this for yourself, to do this for your friend, to do this for your mother, to do this for your colleagues, and like to do this for potential customers as well, okay? It means you're going to have to come down here and say number of mothers' rooms, and then you're going to repeat the process, number of mothers' bathrooms, number of parents' rooms, number of parent bathrooms, number of, what about if you want to do it for your vacation house? Number of vacation rooms, number of vacation house, like, it's going to be a mess, okay? It's going to be a mess. So, how do you make it such that you can reuse the data, okay? You can create a single thing and then reuse that single thing over and over and over again. And also, if we're talking about creating a house, chances are that it's not just the attributes of the house you care about, okay? So let's imagine we're even talking about a car, okay? And we say we want to do the same thing for a car, okay? And we say the car model, okay? And we say it's a Camry, and then we say the car make is a Toyota, we say the car year, we say the car color, we say the car engine size, the fuel type, and the transmission if it's automatic or manual, okay? The seating capacity of the car, the car price, a couple of other things, okay? And like it can go on and on and on and on. And if we said make the same thing like your wife's car, your friend's car, your daughter's car, your colleagues' cars, like you'd have to type this in over and over and over, okay? That's not how you build a program, okay? So what exactly can we do if we wanted to build a program where all this information will be reusable? There are two ways, okay? One of the things that we can do to group the things together is we can take all of this data and put it into a dictionary. What is a dictionary? Oh, new word alert. Dictionary, okay? A dictionary in Python, or a dict, okay? You see it, I think it's a dict, is a key value data structure, okay? Think of it like the normal dictionary where you go, you take a look at what does amoeba mean, or you take a look at what does loquacious, or what does pusillanimous, or what is like whatever any word you want to find, what does that word mean, okay? So in Python, you look in a dictionary and then you look at a key and you say, what does that key hold, okay? Like, what is the value of the key? So we can make the car a dictionary. Now we have all the data for the car in a dictionary, but that's like, those are just attributes of the car, okay? Your car can drive, okay? Your car can drive, your car can start, okay? And there are things like, even imagine we wanted to talk about also your dog. Your dog can grow, your dog can eat, your dog can, so it's not just the make of your dog, the size of your dog, like the weight of your dog. There are actions that your dog can perform as well. Now the idea behind object-oriented programming is there has to be a way where you store all the data about a dog and all the actions that the dog can carry out in one place, okay? Instead of creating a dictionary that just has all the attributes and then creating a function that will work on those attributes, you want to store the behavior and the data in one place, okay? You want to store the behavior and the data in one place, okay? So how do you go about doing that? Obviously, we can't use a dictionary because a dictionary just holds the data, not behavior. Well, there is a special construct in programming that object-oriented programs have. This special construct is called a class, okay? It's not a class like in the schools we went to, like a primary school class or secondary class or university class or what. A class is, think of it like a recipe of sorts, okay? Imagine you wanted to bake, or you wanted to make banana bread, okay? A class is like a recipe that you'd use if you take very ripe banana, you take, you batter it, you take the flour, you take the butter, you take the eggs, you mix it together, you churn it, like you do all of that, and then you put it, like, there are steps that you follow, increase the oven heat to whatever, and then you're going to get banana bread, okay? So a class is like a recipe. That recipe will give you an object or will give you something when you follow the recipe. That's what a class is. It's like a template. It's like a blueprint. It is something that helps you create many of its kind. So for instance, if we had a car class, that car class will be able to create a car for you, for me, for your mother, for your friend, and whatnot, and so on and so forth. So let's take a look at what a class is, okay? enough talking, time to write some code. Now, here we are going to take a look at oop.py, and then here we're going to say class. Okay, remember we talked about class already. We said the ways that you can create items. You can say name is equals to something, age is equals to something, is married is equals to something, the address is equals to something. Okay, you can create variables that are different data types. They can be dicts, they can be arrays, they can be integers, they can be strings, they can be floats. We talked about all those data types. Okay, to recap, you can have them up here. We can say float, int, list, which is an array in JavaScript, dict, we said tuple, we said set, string, bool, okay, and then none. So these are the data types that we talked about earlier. So we can explain what they all do somewhere down the line, but now you want to create a class. How do you create a class? Remember, creating a class, creating a function, creating a variable is identifying. Your job as a programmer is to identify data. Like, I can't repeat this enough. Your job as a programmer is to identify data, okay? You identify data so you can transform it from one form to another. You identify data so you can save it to a database. You identify data so that you can have it interact with some other data and produce aggregate data. Like, your job is data wrangling, data munging, data manipulation, data. Again, even if you're playing a video game, if you pressed X on your controller or box or O, whatever, depending on the game you have, you send data to the console. That data transforms some data that is shown on your screen, and then you think you're interacting with objects, and it's saved somewhere, and like, it's basically just data manipulation, okay? So, if your job as a programmer is identifying data and creating ways to hold data, you can use a variable, okay? You can create a function, okay? And you can create a class. When you create a variable, what you're doing is you're taking data and you're saying, I want to store this data in this name. Simple enough, okay? When you create a function, you're saying, I want to, this code that is here, I want to store it in this name, okay? And that should be simple enough. When you create a class, you're saying, this factory, this blueprint, I want to store it in this name. Let me say it one more time for the people in the back. So we have here, let's imagine we want to store the age of your dog. So you can say dog age is equals to 3 years old or 5 years old. That's an old dog in dog years, okay? And then you want to save this data in this name, okay? You want to save this data in this name. You want to save the data in that name, okay? What about a function? If I create in a function, okay, to tell me if my dog is old, I say define dog age in human years, and I multiply it by more like 8, okay? So what I am doing here is I'm saying I want to, this code that is here, okay, all the way to this point, I want to save it in this name, okay? I want to save this code from 8 all the way to dog age. I want to save it in this name, okay? When you say def, you want to save this code here in this name, so that if later I said dog age in human years, the code that will run is this code here, okay? When I say dog age in human years, this code will run. So I don't have to come here and every single time type dog age times 8, dog age times 8, dog age times 8, every time I want to calculate the dog age, okay? I can just call dog age in human years, and like that code is going to run, okay? I don't have to come and say print 5, print 5, print 5. I can just say print dog age, print dog age, print dog age, and I'm going to get it. So I want to save this data in this name. I want to save this code in this name, okay? And then for a class, I want to save this blueprint or this object maker in this name. So here we're going to say class, and we're going to call this class a car, okay? And then remember we said that the car and the function are kind of the same. So you have the class car, okay? And then you have the open parenthesis, and you have the close parenthesis, and then you have is, and then here we define the body of the car, okay? Now, when we were talking about packages, okay, we mentioned that if you want to create a package, you're going to create a folder, okay? And then you give the name of your folder something, okay? But to make something a package, you have to create a file called init.py. Init.py. Does that look familiar? Okay? Init.py is the special file you need to create in a folder to make it a package. Okay? Now, if you're creating a class, the init method is a special method you put in a class to initialize the class, okay? You put the init in a class to initialize the class. Now, this double underscore, they are called dunder methods. You word, okay? They're called dunder methods. Don't let it scare you. It just means double underscore. So you take the D from double, and then you take the under from underscore, and it gives you dunder. Okay? So, and they have special meaning in Python. Okay? They have special meaning in Python, and you can see there's double underscore init.py. You have the double underscore init in the class. But let's ignore all of this in the class for a minute, and let's just take a look at this class here. We say class car, okay? And then we define something here. Now, why did we do this? Why are we using the car? And why are we using a class? So the reason why we're using a class is because if we don't use a class, whenever we want to create a car, we're going to have to do this nasty, ugly, ridiculous activity here, where we say car model, car make for every single person, and then we create a dictionary. And then we're going to, if we had to do this for 100 people, we're going to have almost 4,100 lines, because we're going to do this 100 times. And that doesn't make any sense, okay? That doesn't make any sense at all. So the easiest way to replicate or to reproduce this is to have something that will give us only one thing, and in that one thing we have all the data that we need. Let's take a look, okay? Inside here, we can come and say self dot model, okay? And we can come here and say something like the model, the make, the year, or let's do this. Okay, so we're going to have
looking at them.
okay, so Okay. Okay. Apologies for the short break in transmission. Let's continue. So, we have, there are a couple of things that are going on right here. Okay? So, one of such is where we say, self.model is equals to model, self.make is equals to make, self.year is equals to year, self.color is equals to color, engine size, soil type, transmission, seating capacity, price. Okay? And then, so what is actually going on here? Okay? What is going on here? We have the we have all this data in a car, okay? And then we have here called drive, or we can have here def calculate fuel consumption, which is something very important given how expensive or how valuable fuel is. So now imagine then that we said we wanted a car, okay? Now, if we open our starter, instead of having all this data here, what we can do, okay, we're going to remove all this data, and then we're going to say from source.oop import car, okay? And then we can say here car is equals to car, and then we can put things like the model is a Civic and the color is black, and I can say my car, okay? And then I can now come here and I can say my brother's car, okay? And so I don't need to do the same, like I can just say my car, my brother's car, and if I can just do the same thing over and over again. And then here I can say, because his is a Civic, okay? So here I can come and do something and I can say print my car dot calculate fuel consumption if I want to travel for 300 kilometers, okay? And I can say here fuel consumption for 300 kilometers, okay? And then here I can see my brother's car fuel consumption for 300 kilometers, okay? So what is going on here? So we have the make of the car, okay? And then we have, so I say my car is a Honda Accord, it's a 2020, it's black, it's fuel type is a petrol, the transmission is automatic, and the seating capacity is 5, and the price is 25,000, and then there's a Civic, and the engine size is 1.5, and I want to calculate the fuel consumption for my car versus the fuel consumption for my brother's car. Now, if I did not use a class, okay, I would have to duplicate this data, duplicate the, call a function and whatnot, but now every single thing I need is in one place, and then I can create an object. In this instance, my car is that object, and my brother's car is another of the same object, and I can create my colleague's car, and I can go on and on and on and on and on. And I can even make this into a method such that when you call the website and then you say calculate fuel consumption, I ask you, give me your car model, give me your engine size, give me all of that. I save it to a database, and whenever you click calculate consumption, I'm just going to fetch your data and I'm going to calculate, and I don't have to start creating your car, my car underscore model, and then like repeating all that tedious work. So that is the whole idea behind object-oriented programming. But let's run this code to make sure that so we're going to say Python source starter.py and let's come here and make this a package, and then let's run that again. Okay, so what you can see here, you see here that fuel exemption for 300 kilometers, okay, is 120. We can actually even make this a little bit nicer. So we can come here and we can say that in the OOP, which is where we have the data for the car, let's delete all this extraneous unnecessary data. Okay, so fuel capacity, so we say return, so we can make this a string. Okay, and we can put this here and we can say this is the dollars. Okay, and then we can, inside here, put a, for 300 kilometers, and then here we say my car dot model. And then we say fuel consumption for 300 kilometers in my brother's car model. Okay, and then if we were to run this again, so let's clear and let's run it again. So you see here we have fuel consumption for 300 kilometers in the Accord is 120, and then fuel consumption for 300 kilometers in the Civic is 200. So here we should be actually getting something cheaper, so our logic is off. Let's go back and correct that. Here we're saying distance over self.engine size. So we want to say distance times self.engine size, for instance. And let's come here and increase this again. Let's clear and go. Okay, so now we have in the Accord is going to cost $750, and in the Civic is going to cost $450, which makes more sense considering that the Accord has a bigger engine. Okay, so what we have seen here is an example of a class. So basically what a class does is a class gives you the ability to store all the data about something in one place, and then store the actions you want to perform on that thing in the same place. And then you can create multiple versions of that thing without having to type a lot of code. Now, because we have created the class once and for all, whoever wants to create a car doesn't need to go and start typing the code again for username and for all of that, and then type in calling, like you just come here and then you say my friend's car, and then you put car, you put the model, you put the make, you put the year, you put the color, and of course you can even make the calculate consumption. You can make the calculate consumption method even more accurate by saying, hey, you want to put the year, and then you want to put depreciation, a percentage, and a couple of other things. Like you get a picture, okay? So when you have a class in places like JavaScript or in Java and many of these other programming languages, you usually have to say something like car, my car is equals to new car, okay? And then you'd say from car, import car, okay? And then you have to say car, my car is equals to new car, which is quite verbose and lots of typing for when you want to instantiate or create a new car, okay? In Python, because of how easy Python is, you just say car is equals to car. That's all. And then of course you say from car import okay, you say car is equals to car. So you don't need to say car, my car is equals to new car. What you can do is, if you want it to be verbose, you can say car, okay, is equals to car. You can do that if you want it, but this is not necessary because you have the car that you're instantiating on the right hand side, okay? Now, when you have a class and you want to create an instance, okay, of that class, you just need to say car is equals to car, okay? When you have a function and you want to call the function, it's the same exact thing. You don't have to, there's no difference. If I had a function that was, let's say I had a function called def print hello, and it just printed y, hello there, says Obi-Wan Kenobi, okay? So if I have a function that prints y, hello there, says Obi-Wan Kenobi, then I don't need to come here and like I can just say return true, okay? So I can say here has greeted equals to print hello, okay? So the way you call a function and the way you call a class, exactly the same way. There is no difference, okay? The way you call a function and the way you call a class, exactly the same way. There is no difference. Python is a very simple, straightforward, stress-free language, okay? Very simple, straightforward, stress-free language. Once you know how to instantiate objects, you know how it works, it is simple to work with. So, if you have a question and you want us to cover something again, we're going to use the next 2 minutes to open the floor for questions to be asked. If there are no questions after the 2 minutes time is up, then I am going to ask a question of my own. Too much sugar. Too much sugar.
good with this?
Okay. Few more seconds to go. No questions? I'm assuming I can ask a very difficult question, seeing as no one is asking a question. 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Okay. Your mission, should you choose to accept it, someone should go ahead and create a class, type a class, and then share the class in the chat. No in Python. Let me share the screen so you can see where the class is. So you see this is a class, okay? What is the difference between this and a class in JavaScript? In JavaScript, you're going to have a class that is class car, okay? And then this is type. I'm trying to type this in Python. Of course, it's going to fail. Okay, so in JavaScript, this is how you have your class. Okay, and then in Python, you don't have this. Instead, you have this. Okay. In JavaScript, you don't have that. You just have this. And then inside here, you have the constructor. Okay. In Python, your class is class car. There is no this. Instead, there is this. Okay, because Python is space delimited. Okay. Then instead of having a constructor, okay, in Python, you have def in it, and then you have self and pass, and then you come outside and you're outside of the class. Because again, Python is space delimited. So if you have the brand, you can come here and you can say brand, and then instead of saying this, you say self.brand is equals to brand. Technically, you can actually come here and name this, and then use this here, okay? No one stops you from doing that, but that's not the convention. You use self, and then self, okay? So, whilst in JavaScript, you have this, in Python, what you have is this. no curly braces, okay? None of that, it's just this and space, okay? Then number 2, beautiful, 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 beautiful. I like that, okay? Very wonderful. And then in class hyper, this is lovely, okay? So now, the reason why you have self is that unlike JavaScript where this implicitly within the context of a scope of a class means the class itself, in Python, self must be, or the this is called self, and it must be the first argument into every single method in a class, okay? So if I want to create a get brand, I must pass in self so that I can return self.brand, okay? If I took out self, there is no such thing as return this.brand and it automatically knows that it's talking about a car, okay? You must pass in self as the first argument and then you can return self.brand, okay? Self must be the first argument before you can return self.brand. Okay, we have achieved escape velocity for classes and we can move on with the tutorial. Now, so when we say from heaven import app, this here is a class. And when we hover over it, you can see it's a class and see it here. It's a class. And in the init, it accepts a configurator object, okay? So this is a class, okay? Now, there is something that is super important for us to talk about, which is optional parameters. Optional parameters. So let's come here and let's type functions.py and let's come here and say def 1 name string and age int is equals to or 30, okay? So here I'm putting curly braces because we just went to Python, to JavaScript. So here we say print this is the name and age, okay? So if you take a look at this function, you'll notice that we have one parameter that is a type string and we have another that is a type int and has this equals to 30 here. This is not anything different from other programming languages, okay? So you have this is the name and age has a default value, in this case 30. So if you call the function 1 and you say hello and you pass in 20, then it will be this is the hello and 20. But if you call it with just hola without putting the second parameter, it's going to be this is the hola and 30 because you didn't pass anything, the default is going to take effect, okay? So when you don't pass in something as the second argument, the default argument is going to take effect, and the default argument taking effect here means that hola would print here and age will be 30, okay? So this is a default value for a parameter, okay? This is a default value for a parameter. Now, if we were to come into the terminal and then interpret this file, This is the hello and 20, this is the hello and 30. Exactly what we expected, because for this we provided the value of 20, and then when we don't provide anything, the default parameter is going to be what is passed into the function, okay? So when you have a second parameter, and that parameter has a value, then this here is an optional parameter, okay? This here is an optional parameter. That is a parameter that can be omitted, and the function will run, okay? That's an optional parameter. Okay, so coming back to the main.py file. So from Heaven import app, we are importing a class from that Heaven package that we installed. Remember, we said the blog in all capital. Why are we using all capitals? Who can remember? Why are we using all caps? Who can remember why we're using all caps? What happens when you use constants? Beautiful, 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 beautiful. When we use all caps, we're signifying to other developers that this is a constant, don't change it, okay? So imagine you're working in a team and then you signify that something is a constant and someone goes and changes it and the application stops working. Usually what you should do is you should take that developer and they should buy everyone whatchamacallit. You should buy everyone pizza, okay, for 1 month. So if you have a developer that goes into a file and then changes something and as a result something stops working, that engineer should buy everyone pizza for 1 month, okay, and do all the work by themselves. So when you specify something as all caps, they are constants. Don't change them. So if you're in a code base and you see someone put something all caps, it is a constant, don't change it. Okay, moving on. Now here, we say app is equals to app. Based on the tutorials we've had so far, what is going on here? Is app a function or is app a class? Is app a function or is app a class? Is app a function or is app a class? Josephine, you want to give it a go? Victor, Yemi, Regina, Sandra, an instance of a class. Ooh la la. 10,000 cookies for Zainab. Beautiful, 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 beautiful. So the app that we have here is an instance of a class. This here is an instance of a class. It's an instance of the app class, okay? So we have app, and we're creating an instance of this app class. Okay, so for those of us that don't know what an instance of a class is, remember a few seconds ago, we created a car class. We gave the car class a couple of attributes, a couple of properties, okay? And then we gave the car class a method. And that method was to calculate the consumption based on the distance and the size of the engine, okay? So when we created my car is an instance that is, so it's like the recipe we talked about. You have a recipe to bake banana bread, okay? You take the recipe and you make banana bread. What comes out from the oven is an instance of your banana bread recipe, okay? If you bake another banana bread using that recipe, then you have another instance of your banana bread recipe. So the class is the blueprint, or the recipe is the class, the banana bread is the instance of the class. One more time for the people in the back, okay? The recipe is the class, the banana bread is an instance of that recipe. So in other words, what came out from executing that recipe was a banana bread, okay? Now, if you're a store and you have the best banana bread in Abuja, I can imagine maybe you're making 100, 500,000, 10,000 banana bread. So all your banana bread instances come from your recipe. So you have one class, so you have one recipe, but you have thousands of banana breads that have come out from the recipe, okay? So that is what a class helps you to do. You can create the code that you need to create value, and that value will come with data, and it will come with methods that you can use to do amazing things. Let's give an instance. Let's take a look at the app, okay? So we have app is equals to app. And then Zainab said beautifully that the app is an instance of the app class, okay? But what is that app class? Well, the app class is actually the server. Remember the 5th of December. No, remember when we talked about the app class, okay? When we talked about the browser, I mean. We said when you visit a browser, okay, your browser goes to the phone book of the internet and then says, hey, someone's looking for google.com, give me the phone number or give me the IP address. And then the phone book of the internet says, oh yeah, here's the IP address. It is 55566, whatever, okay? Doesn't matter. We took a look at the IP address a few minutes ago. So it goes ahead and it says, okay, this is the IP address. And once you get the IP address, the browser goes and then fetches the website. Okay, so it goes to the computer that is connected to the internet. Remember, we said every computer on the internet has an IP address. Even your phone, every device that is connected to the internet has an IP address. Some IP addresses are shared beyond the scope of this learning tutorial, and some IP addresses are dedicated. Okay? Usually when you have a website, you have a dedicated IP address, because every time someone types in that IP address, they're going to get to your website. Okay, so let's leave that alone, and your browser goes, it gets the phone number or the IP address, and then when it goes to that IP address, there is a computer that is sitting at that IP address, and now we're going to introduce something special. We're going to introduce the concept of pots, okay? Pots. What is a pot? And I don't mean what you cook rice with. I love rice, but it's not this, okay? It's not this, okay? What we're talking about is a computer pot, okay? It's a computer pot. Now, a port is a place on your computer that is exposed for other, it's like, think of it like a socket, okay? Like there's the concept of a socket, but I'm going to abstract it away so you understand. Now, your computer has numerous ports. Ports are numbers, okay? They're like IDs. There are IDs that your computer exposes applications on. So if you have an application on your computer and you want the application on your computer to be exposed on the network, you have to give that application a port, okay? You have to give it a port number, okay? So a port number is like a slot that other things can come into, okay? So that is what a port number is. And we can take a quick look here if you want and read up on it later. Okay? So you can read up on this later. Now, that is what a port is, okay? So when you have an application, you're going to have that application listening on a port, okay? So what happens when your browser goes to the server and it visits that IP address? there is, remember we talked about the HTTP protocol, we talked about how it's the hypertext transfer protocol. Now, what happens is when the browser gets there, it says, yo, what's going up on port 80? And let me prove it to you that it actually goes to port 80. Let's come here and let's type google.com colon 80, okay? That is a port number. Colon 80, the colon is saying I want to go to the port number, okay? That is 80, and the minute I press that, you get google.com. Why is that? Because by default, whenever you type google.com, what you're actually typing in is google.com port 80. 80 is the default port that you listen for HTTP, okay? Now, the port numbers from 1 to 2000, 3000 are usually reserved, and then above 3000 are open for applications to connect. So when you build an application, okay, there are specific port numbers, for instance, that you use for SSH. There are specific port numbers that you use for mail, that you use for IMAP, and that you use for a couple of other things on your computer. Beyond the scope of this, but a port number is where an application listens to connect, okay? So when you go to google.com, you're actually going to port 80. So the browser goes and says, yo, what's going on? What's going on port 80, okay? Or 443, depending, okay? So, and your assignment should be port 80 versus port 443, okay? That is your assignment. Take a look at it later. I'm not going to do it for you. So port 80 versus port 443. So your browser goes to the server, and the server has an application that is listening for incoming requests on port 80. Okay? Now, some servers listen on 80 443, some servers listen on 80 and then redirect to 443. Like it depends on the configuration. Okay? If you want to serve HTTP or serve HTTPS. So, again, we're not going to jump into that now. We're just going to talk about what actually happens now. When you go to the IP address, in the case of the application that is running on that computer is this application right here, okay? It's this application right here, this app. That is what is running on that computer. But what does this app do exactly? What does this app do? Okay, so the app is a class, and that class has a couple of methods, and those methods are to enable you build a web application that you can use to get visitors, and let's say you want to build a Facebook or whatever you want to build, okay? That app is going to help you build a web application, okay? So we talked about GET requests, we talked about POST requests, we talked about a couple of other things, okay? So the app is going to help you build a web application. So here you see we have this app, and then down here you see the app is saying app.get, and then there is this string that is happening here, and we're going to explain what is going on there later, okay? But remember the 5th of December. Well, remember we talked about the methods that the HTTP methods that exist. We talked about get, we talked about post, we talked about put, we talked about delete, okay? So when you create this app, you can use this app as a server to listen for different requests. You can listen for all requests that come to the slash, which is the home page. You can listen for all requests that come to slash dash a specific page. You can listen for even all requests that come to the wildcard, okay? So you can listen for all requests that come to your server. So this is catch every single request. The star here is catch every single request, okay? So you can listen to all requests that come to your server. Okie dokie. So, and then this app, when it listens, it is going to go behind the scenes and then run some code. It is going to go behind the scenes and run some code. Now, usually what happens in a traditional web application is that you visit a URL and then the URL you visit is translated to a function that is called, and that function is going to do something. Either it generates a web page, it saves some data, and it returns that to you. Okay? That is what happens traditionally. Now, in the context of heaven, okay, when you visit this application, and let's imagine here you go to your web browser. Imagine you go to Google, okay? When you go to google.com, you see there is a slash at the end of the Google, okay? Even if you deleted it, that is what you're going to get when you visit the website. When you visit any website and you don't put anything like here, like you don't put like an address or something, then what you get is the slash. And that slash is the default or the index page for every website, okay? Some websites will redirect you from the index page to some other page. It's up to them to decide what they want to do. And the way that they do that, we're going to cover that in a minute, okay? Some websites will redirect you, other websites will return an HTML page to you. So when you visit a website without any address, okay, without anything after the slash, you're going to get the index page. You're going to get the home page, okay? So if you said /address, then you're going to get the address, okay? Now, if we went to a page like salesforce.com/prices, that's taking a long time to load. Workstation.ng/prices. Okay, that's better. So you see here, you have the prices. So when you come to /prices, what is happening here is that the web server, or in this case, this application, is going to look for, is there a function or is there an address that we have on the application that matches /prices? Now, in the case of this, it does match, but for us to understand what is going on here, we're going to take a look at the Heaven documentation. So let's come here and let's type Heaven documentation. Okay? Okay. I hope the screen is visible. Let's make it slightly bigger. Okay, so let's take a look and let's make it even bigger. Okay, so now what you have here is we say from Heaven import router, or from Heaven import application. Like if you take a look there, it says that they're all the same. Also available as app, okay, and application. In the application that we're using, we installed it from app, okay? And then you say app is equals to router, and then you say app is equals to assets, and then app is equals to template. Okay, so let's talk about assets. Remember in the HTML section, we talked about how when you visit a website, what you get is a HTML file. Now the HTML file that you get has links to CSS files, and has links to images, and has links to JavaScript files, okay? It has links to CSS files, links to images, and links to JavaScript files, okay? Now, those are called assets. Now, why are they called assets? Like your images and like they're called assets because they are not a core component of your HTML web page. They are things that the browser needs to go fetch in order to give you a wholesome experience, because most likely the designer of that website designed the website and then put some beautiful designs in a separate CSS file, and then for the website to look beautiful and serve your needs, that CSS file must be downloaded, and some JavaScript file must be downloaded, and some images must be downloaded, and so on and so forth. Okay? So those are assets. Now, many times, some people serve their assets via a CDN, others serve their assets via something like Nginx, and oh yes, let's do this. We're gonna have a 3-minute exercise, and in this exercise, I want all the amazing engineers in the chat to provide alternatives to Nginx. So what is Nginx? Okay, and give me alternatives or other applications you can use in place of Nginx. Your time starts now. Anyone? Nginx. Alternatives to Nginx. Apache. Oh, there we go. And the results are coming in. Microsoft. Oh, goodness gracious, Microsoft IIS. That's a funny one. Okay, so if you're any programmers, experienced programmers in the chat, I'm sure I was not the only one that laughed when we saw Microsoft IIS. I mean, it's valid. It's actually an answer, but yeah. Okay. Yes, Microsoft IIS is very, very valid. Hate your proxy. There's some interesting results coming in. Okay. So, yes, we are 100% Tomcat. Okay, so we are 100% on the money, okay? These are wonderful ways that, but we're writing all this, but no one has said what are all the things that we're writing? What is Tomcat? What is HF proxy? What is Caddy? What is Nginx? What are the things we write? Like, what are they? Nobody? Okay, let's continue. These are all servers, okay? So Nginx is very, very popular, but so is Tomcat and a couple of the other ones. So, and even Microsoft IIS if you're in the Microsoft ecosystem or Microsoft land, okay? So Yes. So usually people want to serve their assets and make it super fast. Some of the things that you can use are a CDN or a content delivery network. So if we are taking a look at assets to be rendered, then sometimes using a CDN can exponentially speed up the asset delivery times, okay? And we talked about why CDNs are super important earlier. We said that think about it like you're visiting a website in the US, and the website you're visiting in the US, the assets and everything are in a data center in Virginia. Yes, you could have fiber optic connection at home, but the amount of computers that you need to hop through before you get there, it probably will be faster if the content was sitting in a data center in Lagos. And if you're in Lagos, like the first hop you get it, it will be super quick and much faster than going all the way to Virginia or going all the way to California or wherever the content you're trying to download is sitting. So content delivery networks offer this kind of advantage. They usually have localization in such places. So yes, moving forward. Okay, so moving on. So we have here app.templates, we have app.get, we have UV icon, app port 5000 reload. So here we're talking about like it's giving a very quick overview of what it is to build an application. Okay, so here we say there's a quick start. Let's take a look at the quick start. And one of the things that we see here is that we say you need to create a handler function. Okay, you need to create a handler function in a file of your choosing, i.e. controllers.py or source.controllers.customers.py. You need to create a handler function. And it says here you have to accept a request, a response, and a context. So let's take this function here and let's dissect what exactly is going on. So let's copy this. Let's come back here. Let's go ahead and paste. So in this function, it says here import JSON. Now, JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. We talked about it in the JavaScript class. We talked about JSON.parse, we talked about JSON.stringify, and we talked about how you could use it. Okay? So it stands for JavaScript Object Notation. Now, if in the JavaScript class we talked about JSON and we were saying that you have JSON.parse, JSON.stringify, the Python alternative to JSON.parse is going to be JSON.loads. Okay? And the one for JSON.stringify is JSON.dumps. Okay? So for stringify is JSON.dumps. So in JavaScript we have JSON.parse, JSON.stringify, and we can take a look at it. If you come here and then you inspect and then you take a look at the console and we say JSON.parse, okay, and we put a string here, you get an object back. And then if you come here and you say JSON.stringify, okay, and you put an object, you're going to get a JSON string, okay? You're going to get a JSON string. So JSON.parse takes a JSON string and converts it to a JavaScript object. JSON.stringify takes a JavaScript object and converts it to a JSON string. And Python land, okay, JSON.dumps takes a Python dictionary, okay, because a JavaScript object is called a dictionary here, and then it converts it into a JSON string, and JSON.loads take a JSON string and it converts it into a Python dict, okay? So, there you go. Okay, so we have here, okay, import JSON, which is where the JSON.loads and the JSON.dumps, where that is, okay. Another thing that we could have done is we could have said from JSON import dumps loads, okay. Although we don't use loads, but we can just do this. And you don't have to say import the whole JSON, you just import what you need. That's fine as well, okay? And again, we talked about how JSON.dumps is how you take a dictionary and you convert it to a string, and JSON.loads is how you take a string and you convert it to a dictionary, okay? So here, we have the response.body, and we say dumps. So we're taking this data and we're converting it into a string. We're taking the data and we're converting it into a JSON string. So what do we have here? We say from JSON import dumps from HTTP import HTTP status. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about HTTP status, okay? Whenever you visit a page, some of you might have seen where you visited the page and it tells you, oh, 404 page not found. Has anyone ever seen this before when they visited a page? If you have, you can type it in the yes. I see people are saying yes, okay? And Google has a lot of errors in their console, bad Google, okay? So when you visit a page, you see 404, page not found. Now, the 404 is a HTTP status. 404 is a HTTP status. Think about it like when you, in the army or in different places, they have different symbols for AOK and for different and whatnot. HTTP, every server is supposed to return a status code. If they're good, they say 200, okay. If you want to create something, it should return 201, created. If it's a redirect, you're in the trio category, temporary and permanent. If it's a user error, you're in the 400 bad request, the 401 unauthorized, the 404 not found, and so on and so forth. And if it's the server that has an error, you're in the 500 internal server error category. How do you know all these things? Well, quite simple. You come here and then you say HTTP statuses, okay? So HTTP response status codes. And then you see that there are a couple of them. You have 100 is continue, you have 200 is okay, like we said, 201 is created, 202 is accepted, love that one. 204 is no content, 205 is reset content, telling you that what you're trying to say is stale, okay? 208 is already reported, 226 is in used, 300 multiple choices, 301 moved permanently, 302 found, 303 see other, 304 not modified, 307 temporary redirect, 308 permanent redirect, and then you have the 400s where we talked about bad request, unauthorized, like we said, payment required, forbidden, not found, method not allowed, 405. for not acceptable, proxy authentication required. There's also unprocessable entity, there's 409 conflict, and precondition failed, unsupported immediate type, expectation failed, misdirected request, unprocessable content, okay, which is 422. Upgrade required, precondition required, too many requests. When you make too many requests and the server is rate limiting you, unavailable for legal reasons, the lawyers would love that one. So there are different status codes that a server should send back as part of the HTTP standard when you visit a web page. So when your browser goes to a web page and it gets a 404, some browsers will just even show you not found. Let's take a look, okay? Let's come to something that we know might not exist. Workstation.ng/. Okay, so here it says page not found and it responds appropriately. But let's look for an application that doesn't respond as nice. Let's see. Let's say okay, so you see that the code that was most likely received here page not found. You can see it here. Page not found, but then it's, oh, okay. There's actually something like this. Well, some browsers would not even, like here you see 404, oops, seems like you got lost, okay? Some browsers will not even show you the, like they just show you page not found, okay? So, you want to see pronounced words? Okay, we can turn on the captions. Hopefully that is better. Does that work? Nevius? Okay, so we've turned on captions, and so if you can't hear per se, hopefully you can read. And hopefully Google captures what I'm saying and doesn't translate when I say Python to Python. Okay, so some websites will not render if it returns, some web browsers, like they just show you a generic not found. I think, is it Chrome that does it? I can't remember. Okay, so moving on from that, so status codes are part of the standard. Status codes are part of the standard. When you visit a website, you are going to get some status codes. Now, you don't have to remember all of them, and that is why Python provides you with a very nice way to remember HTTP status codes. To do that, you just have to say from HTTP, import HTTP status, and then when you come here, if you say HTTP status dot, you see everything there. You see already reported, bad request, bad gateway conflict, continue, created, early hint, expectation failed, failed dependency, forbidden, found, gateway timeout, gone, I'm a teapot, insufficient storage. So basically you can get the status code without knowing the status code. So for instance, if I want to get conflict, now due to having implemented so many APIs, I might know what the conflict status code is, but I can just come here and say conflict. So you're trying to create a record and there is a conflicting record on the server. I would return a conflict status code so your app knows that it's a conflict and not to try it again, okay? Or you try to create something, okay, or you submit something and it's not yet created, I can tell you accepted and it's going to be worked on later, or I can tell you 201 created, okay, which is this one here. Now, there are different status codes, and with Python, you don't have to remember what status code is what. The minute you import HTTP status and you put HTTP status dot, you will be able to get textual representation, and then that will be translated by Python into the appropriate status code. Okay? So now we're talking about the standard library. We're taking a look at some of the things in the standard library. So before we continue, one of the things that I'm hoping we can accomplish is I would like someone to tell me how to import something from the standard library. So in the standard library, okay, there is a package called OS, okay, and there's something in OS called environ. How would I import environ from OS? How will I import environ from OS? Who can type out the solution to that in the chat? How will I import environ from OS? Any takers? No answer is a wrong answer. Well, the answer will be wrong, but like no one's gonna laugh. You're just gonna get from OS import environ. Ooh, big ups to Tayo. Super nice. From OS import environ. 100% spot on. So, and that is the way that the standard library works, okay? If you want to use something, there are so many powerful libraries, powerful things that exist in the standard library. And if you don't find something in the standard library, you can find it on PyPy. And that is why Python is loved by data scientists. Because if we go to, this is a tangent. For those of you that might be interested in data science, let's take a look real quickly. I would advise that you create an account on Hugging Face, okay? Now, if you create an account on Hugging Face, like this is not a marketing stunt. Like they're just a wonderful product. If you create an account, so you can see that there are a lot of language models, like you have OpenAI MMLU, you have awesome ChatGPT prompts, like there are tons of language models here. So if you're an AI enthusiast, you can come here. Python is wonderful for this. By the way, lots of them Python, from TensorFlow to like Python is this is the bread and butter for Python. So if you come here, you can find so many generative pre-trained transformers, GPTs, basically. So if you are an AI data science enthusiast, you can come here and take a look and download a couple of language models and then go to PyPy and search. There's also OpenLammer and a couple of other ones that you can get that would get you going. Okay, outside the context of this training, but since we're talking about the standard library and what you can get from Python, I just thought I'd put that out there. So it's a very quick and easy way to get into AI and data science, okay, to all the people watching online on YouTube. That's a very quick way for you to get into data science. So Python comes with a lot of lots of powerful packages, tools, utilities in the standard library. And the way for you to leverage that, you basically say from OS import this, or from os.this import that, and you can just pull in what you need, and voila, Bob's your uncle. From working with dates to working with, you can even like subtracting date. Like it's a very simple, expressive language, and chances are that you will be able to build applications much faster than you would if you wanted to take something that is a little bit more complicated. Okay, so moving on. From HTTP, import HTTP status, and we now have from heaven, import request, import response, import context. Okay, so you want to be a web developer, okay? So you want to be a web developer. There are three things that we need to cover. When your browser, when you type google.com in your browser, or you type facebook.com in your browser, what happens is your browser, like we said, goes to the phone book for the internet and then gets the IP address, calls the IP address, gets a web page back, yada, 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 and so on and so forth. Okay? But what is actually sent to that computer on the internet? It's a HTTP HTTP request. It's a HTTP request. That is what is sent to the computer on the internet. Now, usually, your browser is going to send along any cookies if it's stored on your computer, any headers, metadata information that tells that will tell the computer if you're using a Windows computer, if you're using a Mac, if you're using a Linux. It's going to tell it what browser you're using to browse, okay? So that is why when you go to some websites, they can easily say you have a MacBook because of they are able to get your user agent, okay? And we'll talk about that when we get into the header section. And they're able to infer. They can also get your IP address, and they can do some IP address lookup and tell you where exactly you are, okay? So a lot of information about you can be gleaned whilst you use the internet, and that's why you have many companies say use a VPN. I would also recommend you use a VPN so that your data is secure. But before we digress, what is actually sent to that server is a HTTP request, and that HTTP request has tons of info that enables the server to respond. Okay, so a HTTP request goes to the computer. A HTTP response comes from the computer back to your browser. So, from Heaven import request and response handles the first part. The request that comes from your browser is the request that Heaven puts in this function, and the response that goes back to the browser is what you will control and what you will send, okay, what you will use to control what the browser does, okay? And then the context is a way for you to control if the person is signed in, the data that you want to send to the to your HTML, if you're sending any data and whatnot. So let me take it slow again so it makes sense. When your browser goes to Google or Facebook or whatever, or Workstation or Daily Trust, or like when you visit any of this TBHI, wherever you go, okay? There is an IP address that is gotten, and then that computer is called, and then what your browser will send is a HTTP request, okay? The HTTP request comes to that computer or the server, and then the server is going to respond with a HTTP response that your browser will use to show you the web page and do whatever it wants to do, okay? Request, response. Is it clear? Are there any questions? Non-use is good news, so let's continue. Okay. Amanda has a question. Type it in the chat. Amanda has a question. Okay, so whilst we wait for the question to be typed in the chat, we can continue, and when the question is typed, if it is asked, we will answer. And okay, so the request is what the browser sends, the response is what the browser receives. The request is what the browser sends, the response is what the browser receives. The context is how you, as an application engineer, can decide if you want to store if the user has signed in and the data that you want to share. Are you sending a JSON back? Are you sending a web page? Like, you can store some data in the context. And we're going to get to the context in a bit. Okay? So, what Heaven actually does for you is when the browser sends a HTTP request to your computer will receive the HTTP request if you're using Nginx, As a reverse proxy, then there is SSL termination and whatever if you have that set up, and then there's the data piped into your application, okay, the application layer, and that request is transformed and received by heaven, okay? The request is transformed and received by heaven. Now, that is what comes into this function here. So basically what heaven is saying is create a Python function, okay? So def Python function, okay? The Python function should accept 3 arguments, okay? So we're going to call it 1, 2, 3, okay? Now, as long as you create a Python function that accepts 3 arguments, you can tell heaven that when somebody visits or when somebody sends a GET request to /prices, then call this Python function, okay? When somebody sends a GET request to /prices, call this Python function, okay? Amanda says, I came in late. Please kindly explain meaning of context. Also, what does this context mean? My members, my member. Where did you see my members, my member? Oh, I see. So you're saying, where did you see my members, my member? Okay, so I can explain what is going on here. So I think it's going to be the typing, okay, the typings. So in Python, recently in Python, you can include typings, okay? So you can have a function that takes in 3 arguments, 1, 2, 3, okay? And then if I come in here and I say 1.body, there is nothing, there is no intelligence. You see, Visual Studio Code doesn't tell me what 1 is, okay? I don't know. I honestly don't know what 1 is, okay? However, I can come here, and remember we said whenever you see the colon is equal to is. So I can say 1 is request, okay? 2 is response, because the colon is the is. 3 is context. Okay? I hope I've answered your question. So the colon, when you see the colon, in that manner, you say 1 is this, 2 is response, 3 is context. Why is it important? If I come in here now and I say 1 dot, you see, like the minute I say 1 dot, I can see all the members for 1. I can see all the attributes. I can see the methods. I can see even the private variables. I can see everything, okay? I can see the pass query string. I can see the double underscore attributes. I can see everything just because I annotated or I specified the type of 1. Okay? And then if I come here to 2 dot, I can also see all the status, the render, the redirect, and the header, the defer. I can see all the members and all the methods of 2. And if I come and I say 3, I can do the same thing. I can see keep and everything in 3. Okay? So when you have 1 colon something, just say 1 is request, 2 colon something is 2 is response, 3 colon something is 3 is context, okay? And then, even if it's a dictionary, okay, we can say here A is 5, sorry, let's do this as a string, okay? A is 5, B is true, C is yimu. Okay? So whenever you see the colon, think about it like is. And then it works in most parts of Python. Okay? So whenever you see the colon, think of it as is. Okay? So now the reason why I wrote 1, 2, 3 is because the idea behind heaven is that if you have a Python function and the Python function accepts 3 arguments, then heaven will pass the request from the browser to that function. It will pass the response that you're supposed to send back into the function, and it will pass the context into the function. Okay, and I'm going to tell you what the context is in a little bit. The request will be passed in first because that's what comes from the browser. The response will be passed in second because that's what goes back to the browser. The context will be passed in third because that doesn't go to the browser unless